My name is Thomas Ellery, and I have been employed for the past 3 years as the night guard of the Western Antiquities Museum, a building that most residents of the city have either forgotten about or never knew existed in the first place. I am 37 years old, unmarried, with no children, and I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment that overlooks a dimly lit alleyway 2 blocks from the river. I mention these details not for vanity's sake, but because they explain, in some small way, why I took the job in the first place. Men like me, quiet, unobtrusive, perhaps a little tired of the bustling pace of ordinary life, find comfort in long stretches of silence and the company of objects that cannot speak back. It is a kind of companionship, though a strange one, forged between living man and ancient stone. The Western Antiquities Museum sits on the far edge of town, where the roads are narrow, cracked, and less maintained, and where streetlights grow sparse until darkness itself seems to swallow them. The building is an anachronism, a relic from the late 19th century that had never received the renovations of its peers. From the outside, it appears more like an abandoned courthouse than a museum. Red brick walls streaked with black water stains, windows tall and narrow with heavy frames of wrought iron, and at its highest point, a single clock that has not ticked for decades, its hands forever frozen at 12 minutes past 3. The city council debated for years whether to shut the place down, but arguments about historical value and cultural heritage always managed to preserve it. That, and the simple truth that few people cared enough to notice it was still open. On most days, the museum's only visitors are schoolchildren on field trips and the occasional tourist who mistakes it for a landmark. By dusk, the place empties completely, and it is then, when the last footsteps echo out into the parking lot and the final car taillights vanish into the night, that my shift begins. The position of night guard was described to me as low risk, high patience. The pay was steady, the hours peculiar but manageable, and the responsibilities straightforward. Patrol the halls, make sure the alarms were armed, keep an eye on the security cameras, and above all else, follow the rules. I was told of these rules on my first night by the head curator, a man named Dr. Malcolm Reeve, whose pale complexion and hollow voice gave me the immediate impression of a man who had spent far too much of his life underground. He wore a long gray coat even in the warmth of summer, and when he handed me the small binder that contained the guard regulations, his thin fingers trembled, though not from age. He was only in his 40s. "You'll find everything you need to know here," he said, sliding the binder across his office desk. His eyes did not meet mine but lingered instead on the window behind me, where the night was already thickening. "You must follow every word precisely. There are no exceptions. Failure to comply is dangerous." At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. All jobs have their quirks, and many workplaces dress up their manuals with dire warnings that no one truly believes. I had worked at a shipping warehouse before this, and remembered being told that stepping out of the painted safety zone could result in immediate fatal injury. In truth, it usually meant you might stub your toe on a pallet. I assumed this was the same. Still, out of politeness, I nodded and took the binder. The first section contained the standard instructions, I expected schedules, procedures for locking doors, how to handle the alarm system, but tucked into the back was a single page typed in a different font, as though it had been added later, and across the top was written, SPECIL RALS in IGHT. There were 12 in total, and though I will not yet recite them all here, I will say they were unlike any professional instructions I had ever seen. They read less like workplace policy and more like superstitions whispered around a campfire. One example, Rule 3, if you hear footsteps in the Hall of Pharaohs after midnight, do not investigate. Proceed directly to the security office and wait until the sound ceases. It will not last more than 13 minutes. I admit I chuckled when I read that one. Another warned Rule 7, do not look at your reflection in the central atrium glass after 2 o'clock. If you must pass through, keep your gaze forward and your pace steady. And perhaps the strangest, Rule 10, should you encounter the woman in white on the east staircase, do not speak. She will ask you a question. Whatever it is, you must not answer. Keep walking. When I looked up from the page, expecting Dr. Reeve to smirk or explain that it was all some elaborate joke, I found instead that his face had grown rigid, his eyes dark with something I could not name. You will follow them? He said, his voice quiet but firm. Everyone. I do not exaggerate. I nodded again, though this time with less certainty. That first night, as I sat alone in the security office, watching the rows of grainy camera feeds flicker on the monitors, I thought of those rules again and again. I expected tricks of the eye, maybe rats scurrying across the marble floors, the groan of pipes mistaken for footsteps. Old buildings have a way of sounding alive, even when they are not. Still, I could not shake the unease that had settled into me after Reeves' warning. By 1 in the morning, I found myself walking the halls. The museum's exhibits were dimly lit by small overhead lamps, their beams illuminating sarcophagi, stone tablets, and glass cases filled with ornaments older than entire nations. Shadows clung thick between displays, and my flashlight beam cut through them in narrow slices. The air was colder than outside, though the heating system ran until dawn. It was in the Hall of Pharaohs that I first understood the seriousness of the rules. The hall stretched nearly 100 feet long, lined with statues of Egyptian gods and kings whose eyes seemed to follow every step. The silence was profound, so much so that I could hear the beating of my own heart in my ears. Then, faintly, it came the sound of footsteps. They were distant at first, soft, deliberate, but unmistakable. I froze. My rational mind leapt to explanations. Perhaps another guard, though I was alone. Perhaps the curator, though Reeve had left hours ago. My flashlight beam darted across the polished stone floor, catching nothing but the empty hall ahead. The footsteps grew louder, nearer. My first instinct was to call out, "Hello?" formed on my tongue, but I remembered Rule 3. Do not investigate. Proceed directly to the office. I backed away, pulse racing, until I reached the corridor door. As I turned, I glanced once more toward the shadows. The footsteps had stopped. Back in the office, I sat trembling, my hand tight around the flashlight. 13 minutes, the rule had said. And true enough, exactly 13 minutes later by my watch, the sound returned, fading this time, retreating into silence. That was the first night. I wish I could say it grew easier after that, but in truth, each passing shift only deepened the strangeness. There were other rules that soon became relevant, and each revealed its necessity in due course. The museum was not merely old, nor merely neglected. It was inhabited by something that had no interest in being named, let alone explained. Its presence was woven into the air itself, into the cold stone floors and the glass cases that reflected more than they should. By the end of my first week, I had memorized the rules by heart. By the end of the first month, I no longer laughed at them. The museum had taught me, and the lessons had only begun. The second week of my employment began with an addition to the routine. A collections assistant appeared during the afternoon to leave a crate in the freight corridor and a message for me. Her name was Alina Voss, 20, 9 years old. The collections technician under Dr. Malcolm Reeve. She had pale hair that made her seem younger, and a way of speaking that stacked words like careful boxes. Her note was written on a yellow tag and tied to the crate with twine. Do not open. Do not touch. Do not move. Object intake tomorrow at 9 a.m. Voss. Beneath her writing, In a thinner, older hand, someone had penciled Rule 12 applies. The handwriting was unmistakably Reeves. I set the crate where she left it, corner pressed against the wall, gate locked, and began my shift as usual. But from the moment I sat in the office and watched the freight corridor camera, I felt as though the crate were aware of me. Its wooden slats and customs tape looked too precise, as though they were not containing something but cooperating with it. By 11, the footsteps in the Hall of Pharaohs began their appointment. I no longer lingered in the doorway to listen. I retreated immediately, locked the office door, and counted the minutes. This time, though, the footsteps paused early, as if they too were listening for me. When silence returned, I checked the monitors again. Every gallery looked unchanged, statues rooted in shadow. But on the freight corridor feed, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: a chalk mark on the lower panel of the crate, faint but deliberate. A door drawn within a door, with a keyhole in the center. The rule warned if crates knock, obey the pattern. 1 knock is curiosity. 2 knocks, call Voss. 3 knocks, leave at once. I told myself it was nothing. Chalk marks on shipping crates are common. But the longer I stared, the less ordinary it seemed. At 1:06, the office phone rang. A single chime. I did not answer. The brass phone in the East reading room shifted on its table, its receiver twitching like a startled insect. I logged the incident and tried to swallow the rising dryness in my throat. Then came the cold. A sharp, coin-like chill pressed against my upper back, just below the shoulder blades. It lasted 4 breaths before fading. Rule 5 whispered through my mind: if you feel the coin, do not touch it. Stand before the obelisk. Wait. I hadn't moved, and still it had tested me. At 2:08, I passed the atrium. The glass caught me despite my care. My reflection lingered a half second out of sync, its lips parting to shape words I could not hear. I tore my gaze away and forced my pace steady, but guilt clung to me like a second skin. I had broken the rule, however briefly. The punishment followed quickly. In the Mesopotamian gallery, the dish of salt beneath case 4B had crusted over, damp and useless. Across the floor were marks, like hooves, but wrong, angled sideways like dancers' steps. My heart hammered. I scattered new salt, thicker than required, whispering an apology I didn't know who would hear. That was when the woman in white appeared. She waited at the top of the east staircase, veil pale against the dark. I felt the cold perfume before I saw her. Rule 10 demanded silence. She tilted her head toward me, and her voice slid through the air without her mouth moving. Do you remember what you promised? I clenched my teeth, refusing to answer. Her presence swelled, a hunger older than dust. I kept walking, steady, each step counted. When I reached the corridor corner and glanced back, she was gone, leaving only the scorched sweetness of burned sugar in the air. By 3:12, the atrium clock mocked me with its frozen hands. But that night, all the monitors flickered to the Hall of Pharaohs. The statues stood aligned, heads turning toward the camera, and down the center of the hall came a procession. Figures robed in black, masked in gold, each carrying something small and utterly black, objects that swallowed light itself. As they passed, the statues bowed. I could not move. I could not breathe. The feed snapped back to normal an instant later. When Elena arrived the next morning, I told her what I'd seen. She did not doubt me. She only asked, "Did you answer her?" I shook my head. "Good," she said. "So long as you keep silent, you still belong to yourself." Her words chilled me more than the apparitions, because they suggested that the silence was not just survival, it was ownership. And one night, the silence might not be enough. The days outside the museum blurred into trivial noise. The smell of bakeries, the weight of traffic, the mutter of pedestrians. None of it mattered once the heavy iron doors shut behind me at night. What lived in those halls had become my true calendar. Each shift another entry in a journal of rules and warnings. It was during the third month that I began to understand the rules were not independent. They spoke to one another, intersected like veins beneath stone. Breaking one stirred another. I learned this the hard way. The night began with the usual ritual, a nod to the obelisk, a whispered greeting so low I barely believed I'd spoken aloud. Its surface gleamed faintly under the gallery lights, inscriptions burning with a patience that outlived kings. My shift passed quietly until the footsteps began again in the Hall of Pharaohs. They usually lasted 13 minutes, fading into silence like a tide retreating. This night, the pattern fractured. 9 minutes in, while I stood in the office listening, the sound stopped abruptly. I looked at the monitors, expecting emptiness. Instead, every feed showed black for 3 heartbeats, then returned. On the corridor camera, the crate waited. The chalk doors glimmered faintly, lines thicker than before. The keyhole darker, almost as if ink had soaked into the wood. I leaned closer, my breath misting the glass of the monitor. That was when the knock came. 1. The sound vibrated through the office, not through the speaker but through the air itself. 2. My stomach dropped. The rule was clear after 2 knocks: call Voss. My hand hovered over the phone, trembling. But before I could dial, a 3rd knock slammed the crate, loud enough that dust shook loose from the camera lens. 3. I froze. The instructions were absolute. 3 knocks meant no one. I couldn't call her. I couldn't open it. I could only leave it. The silence after was worse than the knocks themselves. The crate sat in place, still and ordinary, yet the air around me buzzed with the feeling of something listening, waiting to see if I'd break. I forced myself to log the incident. Though my handwriting came out jagged, I stared at the page so long I nearly missed the next rule awakening. At 2 o'clock, patrolling the atrium, I caught my reflection again. Not by choice, just the natural betrayal of glass. The figure in the pane lagged half a beat behind my stride. Its eyes glowed faintly, its mouth stretching into a smile that showed too many teeth. I broke the rule. I looked, and the reflection mouthed words, "Let me in." I staggered forward, tearing my gaze away, but the punishment came swift. In the Mesopotamian gallery, the salt beneath case 4B was gone. Not crusted, not spilled, gone as though something had licked it from the dish. Hoofprints angled sideways across the stone, vanishing beneath the shadow of a broken tablet. I knelt, fumbling salt from the pouch, whispering an apology under my breath. The air chilled. The perfume arrived. She was waiting at the east staircase. The woman in white. Her veil drifted though no wind stirred. She watched me without eyes, her face blurred beneath fabric. And then her voice filled the gallery, smooth as poured water. "Do you think you are the only one watching?" I clenched my jaw, counting numbers in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rule, do not speak. She took a step closer. He watches too. The one in the glass. He is patient. My heart thrashed. I kept walking steady, refusing to answer. Her perfume followed me, burning sweet, until I turned the corridor and she was gone. At 3:12, the atrium clock mocked me with its frozen hands. Every monitor shifted to a single feed, the Hall of Pharaohs. The statues stood aligned, but they were no longer still. They had bowed, their heads angled toward a procession moving down the hall. Figures in black robes, faces hidden behind golden masks, carried small objects clutched close to their chests. Things darker than shadow, things that devoured light. Step by step, they passed the statues, and with each figure, another statue bent its head. I could not breathe. The feed flickered, then blinked away, returning to empty stone. I sat trembling in the office chair, unable to write, unable even to blink. The silence afterward felt heavier than sound. When Elena arrived in the morning, I told her. I described the knock, the reflection, the woman, the procession. She listened, eyes sharp, her clipboard forgotten at her side. "Did you answer her?" she asked at last. "No," I whispered. She nodded once. "Good. As long as you keep silent, you still belong to yourself." Her words struck harder than any apparition. Because silence, I realized, was not just survival. Silence was ownership. And the museum wanted ownership above all. Morning sunlight had never looked more fragile. When Elena left with the crate, I walked out into the waking city. But every sight felt counterfeit. Cars moved. People bought bread. Children shouted near the river. Yet all of it seemed staged, as if the world outside was only a backdrop painted to distract me from the building I'd left behind. By evening, when I returned, the museum welcomed me with its familiar hush. The air tasted of stone and varnished wood, colder than the humid streets. Locking the heavy doors behind me felt less like securing the museum and more like sealing myself inside a coffin. I followed the routine. Lights checked. Alarms tested. Binder of rules set on the desk. Greeting to the obelisk spoken softly in the Near East gallery. Each act soothed me, though I knew soothing was only bait. But something had shifted since the night of the 3 knocks. I felt it from the first step down the corridor. The museum was not merely watching me anymore. It was waiting. The shift began with silence too deep, as if the whole building had inhaled and would never exhale. On the monitors, the galleries glowed faintly, empty but not lifeless. I told myself the rules were protection. I clung to them the way a drowning man clings to driftwood. At 11:30, the footsteps began in the hall of Pharaohs. The rhythm was wrong. They did not echo in the steady pace I knew. Instead, they stumbled, hesitated, then resumed, like someone limping. I backed into the office, counting the seconds. But 13 minutes passed, and the sound did not fade. The binder warned of this possibility in a margin note. If the pattern breaks, remain still. Do not enter the hall. Do not attempt to help. I sat frozen. The footsteps dragged on uneven for 23 minutes before silence returned. My body shook with the effort of not moving. I wrote the entry in the log, hand cramped. But when I looked at the words, I saw another hand had already written over mine. A faint second script threaded between my letters, curling and delicate. It read, "You cannot follow forever." The pen dropped from my fingers. At 1 o'clock, the brass phone in the East reading room rang once. I ignored it. At 1:02 it rang again, twice this time. I strained to hear. "Thomas." The voice was mine. Not an imitation. Not a distortion. My own voice exact, calling from the receiver. "Thomas, I know you can hear me." My stomach twisted. The rule said I could answer if I recognized the voice that called my name. But what did it mean when the voice was mine? Did the museum intend for me to collapse into myself, to pick up and speak to the echo? I clamped my hands over my ears, rocking in the chair until the rings died. When I looked at the monitors again, every feed had changed. Each gallery showed me. Dozens of me, walking the halls, patrolling. Some versions carried flashlights, some bled from their foreheads. Some stared directly at the camera, mouths moving in silent words. I shoved the binder open, desperate for instruction, but there was no rule for this. Only a warning scrawled in old ink near the back. If you see yourself, do not ask which one you are. The screens blinked back to normal. My reflection in the monitors was only mine again. But the question lingered like rot. Had I been the one in the office or one of the others walking? By 2 o'clock, exhaustion dragged at me. I forced myself to patrol the atrium. The glass walls gleamed, reflecting faint light from the skylight. I kept my gaze forward, lips muttering the numbers 1 through 4. Then I heard it, the woman's voice, faint, slipping from behind the glass. "Answer me." I didn't look. I didn't break stride. but the glass pulsed with movement at the corner of my vision, my reflection clawing at the barrier, mouth distended in a scream I could not hear. I stumbled through, gasping, and found myself back in the Mesopotamian gallery. The salt beneath case 4B had cracked again. This time, words had been written in the residuo pen. I recoiled, nearly dropping the pouch of salt in my hands. With shaking fingers, I scattered a fresh circle, thicker than ever before. The word vanished as the granules touched the floor. At 3:12, the museum revealed its cruelty. The monitors shifted to the Hall of Pharaohs once more. The procession returned, robed figures masked in gold. But this time, one carried something I recognized, the crate. Its chalk doors glowed bright as fire, the keyhole open and black. They marched in silence, their heads bowed, and behind them, something moved within the crate. Something that pressed against the slats, stretching them outward like ribs straining against skin. I watched, paralyzed. The figures vanished into shadow, the feed cut, and then, in the office itself, the knock came. 1, the desk shook. 2, the monitors flickered. 3, the binder slid from the desk and hit the floor with a heavy thud. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My body locked in terror as the sound echoed through the office, as though the crate itself had appeared beside me. Then silence. The monitors steadied. The room calmed. But I could feel it. Something was different now. The rule had been obeyed, but something had crossed regardless. When dawn finally came, I stepped outside with legs that barely held me. Alina met me at the freight entrance, clipboard in hand. Her face tightened when she saw me. "You heard 3 knocks," she said flatly. I nodded. She sighed, almost mournful. "Then it's begun." Her words chased me into the daylight, heavier than any shadow. Morning made Elena honest. In the freight corridor, where the lights hum low and the concrete remembers dust, she leaned her hip against the dolly and said, without any of the museum's careful euphemism, "The rules aren't to protect you. Not first. They're to keep the building from finishing a sentence. It started before any of us were born." I asked what sentence, and she looked at the crate instead of me. "Ownership," she said. "It wants names the way a fire wants air. 3 knocks means it has learned the rhythm of a name and is testing for an answer." "It knocked here," I said, touching my chest. "In the office, not in the corridor. That means it can smell you now." She didn't try to soften it. "Well, tighten the perimeters tonight." She drew a thin envelope from her clipboard and slid it to me. Inside lay a scrap of onion paper, yellowed and crisp, carbon typed in a different font than the binder. At the top, Rule 0. Keep your name intact. Use the full name you first gave the building. Do not accept diminutives. Do not let it rename you. Do not sign a name you do not speak aloud first. Where was this? I asked. Under the desk pad since Reeve. She stared at the envelope as if it owed her an apology. He doesn't like to admit there's a rule you can't enforce with a checklist. "What exactly has begun?" I asked. "Threads pulling taut," she said. "You'll feel them tonight." I slept for 3 hours and dreamed I was walking through galleries that would not hold still. Walls turned into narrow streets. Cases turned into shop windows. The obelisk became a lighthouse whose beam found only me. Woke with salt on my tongue and the word "open" scraped raw in my throat. By dusk, the city had the look of a stage reset between scenes. I let myself in, locked the iron doors, and performed the small ceremonies that pretend to be enough. Lights, alarms, the obelisk's greeting spoken plainly, the binder on the desk and Rule 0 copied onto the inside cover in my own hand, neat as a pledge. Nothing moved. Nothing called. That was worse than the footsteps. At 11:11, my watch insisted on the mirroring. The cameras blinked in sequence. Not blackouts, not glitches. A slow, deliberate eyelid of the entire building. When they opened again, The freight corridor showed the crate with its chalk doors unchanged. Only the keyhole had acquired a shine like wet stone. I wondered whether chalk can grow glossy. I wondered whether questions need polish. The footsteps began at 11, 19, and arrived limping, as they had the night before, a drag and a step, as if a fifth invisible rule waited just to trip them. I stayed in the office. The sound tried shapes in the corridor outside, stopped, started, reversed for 6 beats, then retreated, more annoyed than violent. I wrote the time, the pattern, the breath count. When I looked down to check what I'd written, someone had threaded a second script through my letters again. So faint you could ignore it if you wanted to. You cannot follow forever. I put my palm flat on the page and spoke my name, first and last, and the date I first took the keys. Rule 0 felt like a small door that could close quickly if you held it with the right tone. The paper warmed, the ghost hand withdrew. I did not write that part in the log. At 1:03, the red wall phone gave a single click like a tongue against the roof of the mouth. Then Pipes took a breath behind the plaster and began to swallow. That sound always suggests the building has found a river beneath itself and is drinking. I stood in the freight corridor with the gate between me and the phone and told myself fax iron, concrete, fluorescent hum, tape square holding true around the crate's feet. The chalk doors seemed to lean toward me without moving. I said a plain sentence to them, not mine, and returned to the office with the sentence still whole. At 1:40 the coin returned to my spine, colder, heavier, as if it had learned weight. I stood, walked to the obelisk, faced north, and waited the long minute. It did not leave. The rule says to call the number under the telephone if it remains. I lifted the desk phone and tilted it. Taped there in brittle cellophane was a handwritten number I had never dialed. I called. A man answered on the second ring without hello. State your name, employment, and hire date. He said. The voice was dry, impatient, English with a Midlands scrape under it. I did as told. He made a small approving noise that did not sound like comfort.
Say balance once,
he said. Do not move. Balance, I said. The coin grew hot enough to sting. I did not reach for it. He waited through my hissed breath and said, good. When it cools, you will owe the building a fact you do not barter. Speak a single true thing in a room where it can hear you, and do not ask for payment. That will reconcile the ledger you just opened. Who is this? I asked. He ignored the question. Do not call again unless the coin returns and the heat stays too long. It is only for that. It is not a comfort line.
do you understand? Wes! Good!
He said. We'll want you to last. The line died. I stood with my forehead against cold stone while the obelisk hummed like restrained weather. The coin cooled and then was gone. In the reading room, where the brass phone likes to play, I paid the ledger. I have a brother named Matthew, and we have not spoken for 11 years. The room tasted briefly of metal the way blood does. Nothing else happened. That is how the building says we've heard you. At 2, I took the long way to avoid the atrium's glass, and still caught myself in a reflection anyway. A faint ghost in the varnish of a case, a pale face in the sheen of a tablet. The knot, me in the gloss, gave me a look of rueful sympathy, which was almost worse than malice. It mouthed something with 2 syllables. It could have been Thomas or promise. I didn't try to learn which. Rule 0 sat warm over my heart like a thin shield. The woman in white waited on the landing. I felt her before I saw her, the camphor perfume. The cellar cool, the quiet gladly worn for decades. She stepped down one stair and lifted her veil enough to show an outline of a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. The words arrived not in my ear, but in the little vault behind my eyes. Do you remember what you promised? I walked as if she were only air. I kept the numbers gentle. 1, 2, 3, 4, like a child skipping rope in a playground that does not exist anymore. Something in the air pouted like a shut door, and then the cold lifted. In the second-floor corridor, the heat came back, not from vents, but from the coin placed between my shoulders, as if whatever had pressed the coin admired my refusal and wanted me to reconsider. I did not. At 2:38, the brass phone rang twice and used my voice again. "Thomas," it said. "Thomas, are we awake yet?" I picked up the receiver and set it down without bringing it to my ear. Answering without listening is a trick I did not know I knew. The monitor bank held steady until 3:05. Then each camera rolled over, like sleepers turning toward a dream they prefer. All feeds showed the Hall of Pharaohs in an old, grainy monochrome, bowing statues, long shadows. The central aisle a pale rib of stone. The procession entered from the far end. I counted 9 figures in black robes and gold masks. The 10th carried the crate. The chalk doors shone like polished bone. The keyhole was not a hole anymore, but a black coin sunk into the wood. Halfway down the hall, the carrier stopped and set the crate on the floor. The 9 turned to face it and lifted their hands, not in prayer but in a counting of fingers. 1, 2, 3. The crate shook. Something inside pressed outward, and the slats bent as if the wood had suddenly learned to breathe. The 9 did not help. They did not move. They were only a clock with hands of flesh. The feed cut to the office camera for a single heartbeat. The empty chair, the binder on the desk. Then the wall to my left sounded like a door being knocked from inside the bricks. 1, 2, 3. Rule 12 says leave. So I left, out of the office, not toward the knock, not toward the freight corridor. The museum has a talent for hurting, but the binder had taught me how to spill out of its hands, move diagonally. Do not walk straight where it expects. Climb one stair and go down another. I made a crosshatch of corridors and arrived in the Near East Gallery, with no memory of choosing a route. Alina was there. She should not have been. It was not dawn. She wore no blue gloves. In her left hand she held a brass bowl filled with sand the color of old ink. In her right, a spool of red thread. "Emergency protocol," she said. "Help me string the atrium. We'll break the horizon." We tied the thread low, ankle height. Across the mouth of the atrium, 3 lines making a child's game of tripwires. She scattered the black sand along the baseboards in shapes I recognized from labels. Cartouches and eyes and teeth. Drawn as if she were writing a sentence in a language the building could read. In front of the freight corridor gate, she laid the bowl of sand and pressed her thumb to it. When she lifted her thumb, a print remained, whorled and singular. "What does it do?" I asked. "It reminds the building whose hands are here," she said. "It forgets, or pretends to." She produced a rectangle of cotton paper and a glass pen. "Write your name in full," she said. "First, middle if you have it, last. Write it once. Do not adorn it. Do not try to make it beautiful." I wrote like a first grader, blocky and careful. She read it, nodded, and slid the paper under the bowl. "Now it can prefer not to eat you. Sometimes that's the difference between a wound and a scar." Who answered the obelisk number? I asked. "Aldous Wynn." "Most likely," she said, the name flowing into the air like a note. "Guard from the 1920s. The number reaches whoever is on consolation duty. I take Tuesdays. He takes nights when the coin holds. He died in 1947. He's very good at policies." "You said the rules keep it from finishing a sentence," I said. "What is the sentence inside the crate?" She swallowed before answering, as if the answer might abrade. "A question. Some tombs were built not to house bodies, but to house questions. This one asks the same thing in 1,000 dialects. Who do you belong to? It cannot force an answer. It can only arrange your choices. The rules give you other choices to make in the meantime. And if someone answers, it owns the answer, she said. If you say your mother, it wears her voice. If you say no one, it wears that vacancy and becomes your echo. If you say the museum, she did not finish the thought. She did not need to. The red thread hummed without moving, like a plucked string. In the atrium glass, where the reflection usually lurked, there was nothing at all now. No me, no corridor, no skylight, only a flat black like an unlit window at night. If I can't see myself, how do I know I'm here? I asked, and meant it as a joke until the last word. You're here, she said, brisk again. Help me with the salt at 4B. The dish was clean when we reached it, as if a scolded animal had made the bed it had torn. We poured a new surface and smoothed it with the flat of a brass rule. The hoof angles did not return. I wanted to believe in the simplicity of cause and effect. I let myself have 1 minute of that belief, like a warm hand around a cold mug. At 3:12, the clock in the atrium pretended to be what it always pretends, and the building pretended to be only itself, and still the 3 knocks ran like a current under both lies. They came from nowhere this time, which is to say from everywhere. So even Alina heard them and went a little gray. Do not call me if it knocks 3 times, she said, repeating her day note now that the night could bite it. If you call, it will answer as me and make you say the thing you keep in your mouth like a coin. I already gave it a fact, I said. The ledger. She shook her head. That was payment. It still wants your answer. We stood together in the freight corridor while the red phone pretended sleep and the bowl of sand pretended to be only a bowl. The chalk doors had multiplied. There had always been a door inside a door. Now there were 3, nested, the smallest no bigger than a thumbnail, and the keyhole had become a bead sound into the wood, black and glossy, threadless and perfect. Tomorrow, Elena said, keeping her voice soft so the corridor would not feel challenged. We moved the crate to the lab. 2 names must be present for intake, mine and yours. We inventory questions like any other object. We put them on a shelf and feed them their rules. If only one of us is present, the smallest door opens. If it opens, it will step into the space we leave in our sentences. What about Reeve? I asked. He will either be here, or he will do what he has been doing, avoiding the hours he taught you to fear. She allowed herself a small, bitter smile. He thinks the rules make him immune. They make him useful. In the office again, the monitors showed nothing but rooms being rooms. The binder lay open where it had fallen during the knocks. I righted it. Rule 10's margin note had changed. It used to read, "She will ask you a question. Whatever it is, you must not answer." Now, in the thin, slanted hand I had learned to recognize as not quite Reeves, there was an addition. If she asks you to remember, do not try. Memory is an answer. I closed the binder without logging my fear. The red thread across the atrium looked absurd and childish on the camera. It also made the camera flicker whenever the line crossed the frame, an optical glitch that felt like a nod from the building. You have drawn on me. I will draw on you. When the first bruise of dawn pushed at the skylights, Elena pressed her palm to the crate's side, very lightly, as you might touch a sleeping animal to check its breath. It knows your heartbeat, she said. That isn't a disaster. It makes you real. Things that don't know you exist can still invent you. Better to be real. Is that what we're doing? I asked. Choosing the better way to be eaten. We're choosing how much of ourselves we keep, she said. That is the definition of a shift. We walked the long way to the staff door to avoid the woman's staircase, not from fear but from thrift. I felt the building watching us spend ourselves. Outside, the river carried broken light toward a sun that had not yet shown its face. Alana stopped with her hand on the exit bar and said, still looking ahead, "Bring your name tomorrow written again, and bring a question you will not answer. Put both in your pocket. The first will anchor you. The second will make the crate jealous." "What question?" I asked. "Any that matters," she said. "Just don't tell it to me." She left through the door into day. I stood another minute in the revolving dark, feeling the threads inside the museum slacken for the sleep that isn't sleep. In the reading room behind me, the brass phone rang 3 times. I did not turn. I unhooked the line from the cradle, set the handset face down with care, and walked away without speaking. The museum approved, quietly, the way a cat approves by not leaving the room. On the desk, in the logbook that had learned my hand too well, a new line had appeared in neat block letters I couldn't disentangle. Balance paid. Inquiry pending. I went home with my name in my pocket twice, and a question in my mouth I would not say. I walked past the bakery and did not look in. I slept 1 hour and dreamed of the obelisk's shadow standing in a boat, ferrying itself across a narrow river without paying the man who held the pole. When I woke, someone had knocked once on the wall beside my bed. It was my wall. It did not matter. I sat up in the dark and said my name until it sounded like a key turning and a bolt drawing back and a door deciding to stay closed. When night fell again, the iron doors of the museum took me in with their usual patient appetite. I greeted the obelisk. I tested the alarms. I laid the second name, paper under the bowl of black sand, and felt the room make space for me, as if I were a chair it had forgotten to set. At 11, the footsteps resumed their limp. At 1, the coin tried my back and failed to stick. At 2, the atrium glass was only a blank where my reflection might have been, and the red thread hummed like a low hymn sung under breath. At 3:12, nothing happened, which was the worst cruelty yet, because it made me wonder. And wondering is a question I almost answered. Before dawn, when the freight door's locks still looked like a language you could learn if you tried, the crate knocked once, softly, like a shy guest. Elena arrived with her clipboard and her blue gloves. We moved it together onto the dolly. We did not speak to it, and it did not pretend to be grateful. In the lab, beneath bright clean lights that make even dust behave, she handed me the form her hand had memorized and said, "Speak your name." I did. She spoke hers. Somewhere inside the crate, wood twisted with the tiny sigh of something deciding to bide its time. We did not open. We did not look for the edges of the smallest chalk door. We wrote what we needed to write. We set the crate on a shelf like any other dangerous sentence wrapped in paper. We left the lab together. Behind us, in letters no piece of chalk could have made, a 4th door drew itself inside the 3rd. The keyhole stayed the same size. That is how you know you are not done. Elena looked at me with a tenderness that had nothing to do with pity and said, "Tomorrow, we begin to teach it your refusal." She meant we will make a new rule. I nodded as if learning to refuse could be learned like measuring a case or logging a temperature. Outside, the city unrolled its painted backdrop again, and for a few steps, I believed in sidewalks. Then the museum's shadow crossed the street, long fingers in daylight, and I remembered what I'd promised myself my name. Once, in full, my question. Kept my mouth closed. The 6th month of my employment arrived like a bruise that never faded. By then the rules had ceased to feel like guidelines and more like ribs, keeping something vast from collapsing inward on me. I had learned to breathe between them, to measure my life not in days, but in the narrow spaces between prohibitions. But the rules had begun to shift. They were no longer only instructions to me. They were instructions to the building, too. Reminders, restraints, compromises. And compromises never last. The night after Elena and I shelved the crate, the museum's silence changed. It was not empty silence anymore. It was listening silence, the kind you hear when someone presses their ear to the other side of a door. At 11, the footsteps in the Hall of Pharaohs failed to arrive. Instead, the monitors showed statues turned fully toward the camera, all heads bowed in the same direction toward the lab where we had locked the crate. At 1 o'clock, the red wall phone rang once, then twice, then once again, a broken rhythm. The binder had no rule for that pattern. I refused to answer, though the ringing clawed at my teeth like static. At 2, the atrium reflection returned. This time I kept my eyes forward, but in the corner of my vision. My reflection did not copy me. It walked away, striding confidently in another direction, vanishing into the glass. And at 3:12, the monitors blanked. Every feed went black, save one, the crate. Its chalk doors had multiplied again. 4, nested inside one another, the smallest now no bigger than a fingernail. The keyhole glowed faintly, pulsing with each beat of my own heart. I knew it was my heartbeat because the timing was exact. Then the knocks came. 1, 3, 4. The fourth echoed through the entire building, rattling frames, shaking dust from ceilings. There was no rule for 4 knocks. The binder lay open on the desk, useless. The rules had reached their limit. And then came the voice. It did not come from the crate. It came from everywhere. The air, the stone, the glass, even from inside my own scalpel. Who do you belong to? The question was so simple, so soft, yet my mouth opened against my will, desperate to answer. I clamped my jaw shut, whispering the numbers in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4. But the question pressed harder, the syllables curling under my ribs, digging at my lungs. Who do you belong to? The woman in white appeared on the east staircase, veil trembling. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence was the same question made flesh. I fled into the Near East gallery, stumbling toward the obelisk. Its inscriptions gleamed with pale fire, as though lit from within. I pressed my palms to its surface, whispered my name, my full name again and again. Thomas Ellery, Thomas Ellery, Thomas Ellery. The pressure inside me loosened just slightly. The question faltered on me. Footsteps dragged, the limp pattern from nights past. They circled me unseen. The woman's perfume thickened, acrid and cloying. The obelisk pulsed once, twice. Then it spoke, not in words, but in a vibration deep in my bones. A warning, a choice. Rule 0 had told me, keep your name intact. The obelisk added, keep your silence intact. The fourth knock resounded again, this time from the office itself. The monitors flickered, and then, impossibly, the office door opened on its own. I saw myself standing there. Another Thomas. He was thinner, paler, with eyes sunk deep, as though he had not slept in years. His lips curved into that same phosphorescent smile I had seen in the glass. He raised his hand, beckoning. You can stop now, he said in my exact voice. Let me in. I'll take the shift. Every instinct screamed to answer, to give in, to rest. But silence is ownership. Silence is refusal. I turned from him, pressed my forehead to the obelisk, and whispered the question Elena had told me to keep in my pocket. The question I would never answer. It burned in my throat, raw and wordless. The obelisk absorbed it, inscriptions flaring white. The air cracked. The knock stopped. The other Thomas vanished. When I turned back, the woman in white was gone. The perfume had lifted. The building's silence returned. Not listening silence, but the old silence, heavy but bearable. The crate remained on the lab shelf. Its chalk doors still gleamed, 4 nested inside one another. But the keyhole had dimmed. For now, at dawn, Elena found me collapsed in the corridor, binder clutched to my chest. She knelt, checked my pulse, and when she saw my eyes open, she nodded. You refused, she said simply. I don't know how much longer I can. She placed her hand on my shoulder firm. That's the truth of the job. None of us can forever. The rules buy us time. Sometimes time is enough. Her words did not comfort me. They condemned me. Because the museum is patient. The crate is patient. The question will wait. And one night, perhaps not soon, perhaps years from now, when exhaustion has worn me thin and silence has become too heavy to carry, I will answer. And when I do, the museum will own me. My name is Nathaniel Carter, and I am 37 years old. I was born in Colorado Springs, but for the past 5 years, I have lived alone in a cabin deep within the mountains of Utah. When I say alone, I mean it in the truest sense. There are no neighbors within 30 miles, no paved roads that lead easily to my doorstep, and no conveniences of civilization save for a solar generator and a satellite radio that I rarely use. I came here seeking solitude, believing that isolation could bring me peace. I wanted silence, fresh air, and the kind of untamed wilderness where a man could either confront himself or disappear into the earth unnoticed. I thought I understood what isolation meant. I was wrong. The land had belonged to my grandfather, a quiet man who seldom spoke of his past and even less of this particular property. All he ever said, with a sternness that cut through his usual reserve, was that it should remain in the family and never be sold. He passed when I was 20, and the land sat unused for years. When I finally came to it, searching for a place to start over, I discovered a stretch of wilderness, both beautiful and unforgiving. Towering pines formed an unbroken canopy that swallowed the light, and the ridges of the Uinta Basin loomed like jagged sentinels. The soil felt old, older than memory, as though it carried with it the weight of everything that had been spilled upon it. The cabin itself was a labor of stubbornness and sweat. I built it across 2 summers, hauling lumber, shaping beams, and fitting stone into a fireplace that now crackled each night. It was not luxurious, but it was sturdy, and more importantly, it was mine. Within its walls, I felt the kind of freedom one cannot taste in a city. No honking cars, no endless chatter of strangers, no artificial light drowning out the stars. Out here, silence was the law, and I believed myself prepared to live under it. The first year passed in a rhythm that seemed almost idyllic. I chopped wood, drew water from the stream, hunted deer in the autumn, and preserved enough meat to last through the harsh winters. Books kept me company, their spines worn beneath the dim glow of a lantern. I tracked the seasons by the calls of birds, by the thickness of the snow, and by the slow but steady carving of time against the land itself. My solitude was not loneliness then. It was clarity. But solitude has sharp edges, and after the second winter, I began to notice the shadows that moved differently than they should. The first sign came one morning when I stumbled upon the remains of a deer less than 100 yards from my cabin. Its body had been ripped apart, the rib cage splayed wide as though by careful, deliberate hands. The entrails were not scattered randomly the way mountain lions left them. They were arranged in spirals, as if someone had taken the time to craft something grotesque. Around the carcass lay prints in the snow, but none matched the wildlife I knew. They were human in shape, elongated, bare footprints pressed deep into the frost, but distorted, as if the bones inside had bent at impossible angles. I told myself it was some cruel trick, perhaps trespassers trying to frighten me, but who would walk barefoot in a Utah winter, 30 miles from town. A week later, I heard the first voice. It came at night, just past midnight, a low muttering that drifted through the cracks in the cabin walls. At first I thought it the wind, carrying sounds from the canyons, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like language. Broken, clumsy, as though someone unfamiliar with words was trying to force them into meaning. I rose from my bed, lit my lantern, and scanned the dark through the frosted windows. Nothing. The forest stood still, unmoved by breeze or beast. The muttering became laughter a few nights later, brittle and sharp, like the giggles of unseen children mocking me from the tree line. I tried to dismiss it as the byproduct of solitude. Loneliness can play tricks on a man, twist echoes into voices and shadows into figures. Yet doubt settled in, heavier with each passing night. Then came the night when I heard my own voice outside. It called my name. Clear, precise, unmistakable. Nathaniel. Come out. I froze where I lay, sweat soaking the blanket despite the cold. The cadence, the timbre, even the slight rasp in the throat, it was my voice, as though I had stepped outside myself and was beckoning from the forest. I dared not move. I dared not breathe. The voice repeated once, softer this time, almost coaxing. Silence followed, and for hours I lay rigid, waiting for the sun. At dawn, I stepped outside. In the fresh snow were handprints. Human hands, splayed wide and deep, leading from the trees to my door. Not boots, not paws, hands. Something had crawled across the snow on all fours, reaching toward the threshold. It was then I remembered a conversation from years earlier. I had been on a survey trip with a Navajo colleague, the desert firelight dancing across his face as he told stories to pass the long night. He had spoken of skinwalkers, witches twisted by dark rites, who wore the skins of animals to hunt, who fed on human flesh. But most dangerous of all, he said, was their mimicry. They could wear a voice like a mask. They could wear a face until you no longer knew who stood before you. I had dismissed it then as folklore. Sitting now on my porch, staring at those handprints, I felt the echo of his words seep into my marrow. The days became uneasy. Every creak of wood, every shift of wind became a possible intrusion. I began sleeping with my rifle within reach. Yet I doubted bullets would be enough against what stalked me. One evening, while fetching water from the stream, I felt it. The weight of eyes. I looked across the water and froze. There, half hidden among the pines, stood a figure. It was tall, gaunt, its limbs too long for its frame. Draped across its shoulders was what I first thought to be a tattered coat, but recognition struck me sick. The hide of a deer, antlers still attached, blood stiff along the edges. Its face was stretched, as though skin had been pulled across a skull too large, the mouth warped into a permanent grin. Pale eyes gleamed with reflected light, predator's eyes. Then it spoke. Nathaniel, you look tired. My voice, my exact voice. The pail slipped from my hands, splashing into the stream. I fumbled for my rifle, raised it, but before I could fire, the figure melted into the trees, laughter trailing behind like smoke. I returned to the cabin and nailed boards across the windows and doors. I rationed food, leaving only in daylight, but they came regardless. Whispers through the cracks, claws dragging across wood, voices of people I once knew. My mother, my brother, my own colleagues, all of them calling out in familiar tones. Some had been dead for years. One night, pounding rattled the door until the wood splintered. I fired through the window, and the shrieks that followed were inhuman yet tinged with cruel amusement. The pounding ceased. The silence after was worse. But worse still was what I began to see in myself. At night, when the lantern flickered against the window pane, I would catch my reflection grinning back at me though my mouth remained still. When I first noticed it, I convinced myself it was a trick of the lamplight. Shadows could play cruel games when cast upon glass. Yet the longer I stared, the less room there was for denial. My reflection lingered too long, its grin holding, even after my own lips tightened in fear. The eyes shone faintly, paler than they should, and there was something hungry in them, something not mine. I blew out the lantern and sat in darkness, my chest tight, trying to calm the rising tide of panic. I told myself to sleep, to wake with a clearer mind. But I did not sleep. I listened instead to the creak of wood, to whispers bleeding in through the cracks, to laughter that rose and fell like breath just beyond my ear. The following morning, the forest was eerily still. No bird calls, no chatter of squirrels, not even the distant echo of a hawk. The silence stretched for hours. When I finally forced myself outside, rifle in hand, I found new signs around the cabin. The ground was torn with handprints, dozens of them, clawing through snow and dirt. They circled the cabin like wolves circling prey, overlapping, some large, some impossibly small. I bent down to examine one and wished I had not. It was a child's handprint, tiny, delicate, pressed into the frost with inhuman strength. I thought of my younger sister, Sarah, who had died when I was 15. She had been 8 years old, golden, haired and bright-eyed, taken by pneumonia before she could grow into the woman she should have been. The night before she passed, I had promised her she would get better. That lie still weighed on me. Standing there in the wilderness, I wondered if something had plucked that memory from me, twisting it into bait. That night, the voice that came was hers. Sweet, soft, trembling as it had been when she was small. "Nathaniel," she whispered, right outside the wall where my bed rested. "It's so cold. Please let me in." My blood ran cold and I pressed the pillow over my ears. Yet the voice grew louder, desperate. "I'm freezing, Nathaniel. Open the door. Why won't you let me in?" I clamped my hands against my ears until the skin ached. When the voice finally stopped, I dared not look out the window. I feared what I would see standing in the snow, waiting. I began to lose track of the days after that. My food dwindled. I rationed each meal to scraps. Fatigue ate at me. My thoughts grew muddled. I spoke aloud to myself just to hear a human voice, though I no longer trusted the sound of my own. At times, I wondered if I was unraveling, if isolation itself had birthed these horrors. But then I would find the evidence. The clawed wood, the prints in the snow, the laughter that could not be mine alone. One afternoon, desperate to clear my head, I hiked toward a ridge half a mile from the cabin. From its height, the land spread wide, the canyons cut deep, and the forests rolled like an endless green sea. But it was not the view that froze me in place. It was the shapes in the distance. Down in the valley, where the pines thinned near a dry creek bed, figures moved. At least half a dozen, their forms jerking with unnatural rhythm. They crawled on all fours, then rose to 2 legs, then collapsed again as if their bones reshaped with every step. Some wore hides, wolf, deer, coyote, draped like robes. Others appeared almost naked. Their pale skin stretched tight, too long in the limb, too sharp in the joint. I watched them gather around something in the creek bed. At first, I thought it was an animal carcass. But when one of the figures lifted the limp object by the arm, I realized with horror it was a man. His body hung slack, his head lolling, and then the figures descended. Their movements became frenzied. I could hear the faint echoes of tearing flesh even from where I stood. My stomach heaved, and I turned away, stumbling down the ridge in terror. That night I dreamed of them. In the dream I lay upon my cabin floor, paralyzed, while they gathered above me. They bent low, their faces shifting, some becoming my sister, some my mother, some versions of myself. They whispered promises in my voicey freedom, rest, release from hunger and fear. One leaned close enough that its breath brushed my cheek. Its grin widened, and it whispered, "You are already one of us." I woke screaming, drenched in sweat, the lantern long burned out. My rifle lay beside me, but I doubted it offered any salvation. The following days blurred. I tried carving notches into the cabin wall to count time, but my mind slipped. The voices became constant companions, calling at every hour. Sometimes they argued among themselves in guttural tongues I could not understand. Other times they mocked me in perfect mimicry, repeating my own words back at me. Once, while boiling snow for water, I heard my own voice outside laughing. "You're drinking filth." I hurled the pot across the cabin and pressed my hands against my skull as if I could squeeze the madness out. The forest itself seemed to turn against me. Tracks led me in circles when I ventured out. Once, I followed what I thought was the path to the stream, only to find myself back at my own doorstep. Another time, I caught sight of my own figure walking between the trees, rifle slung across the same shoulder, moving with my gait. I shouted at it, and it stopped, turning just enough for me to glimpse its face. It was mine, but the grin again, always that pale, stretching grin. Then it melted back into the woods. I began to fear sleep most of all, for in sleep the boundaries blurred. Dreams no longer felt like dreams. They became visitations. I would wake to find handprints on the inside of my windows, though I had nailed them shut. Once, I awoke to the sound of someone breathing inside the cabin, steady, calm, inches from my ear. I swung the rifle wildly, lantern sputtering to life, but no one stood there. The only evidence was the faint imprint of hands upon the dust of the table, fresh and undeniable. The breaking point came on a night when the pounding returned, louder than before. The door shook on its hinges, wood splintering with every blow. Voices screamed, overlapping, my family, my colleagues, strangers, all shrieking in a cacophony. I fired through the door, shot after shot until my ears rang and smoke filled the cabin. Silence followed. When dawn came, I opened the door cautiously. The snow outside was trampled with prints, hundreds of them, layered over one another, until the ground looked churned, and at the very center of the chaos lay something that froze my blood. It was my own boot, torn, soaked in blood, half buried in the snow. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door, heart hammering. How? My boots were on my feet, yet there it lay. Had they taken something from me, some part of me I had not noticed until now? Was I being worn even as I breathed? From that day, the reflection no longer only grinned, it moved differently. Sometimes when I lifted my hand, it delayed, as though learning anew how to mimic. Other times, it watched me with a patience that was not my own. And one night, as I stood staring into the dark pain, my reflection leaned forward though I had not. Its lips parted, and in my voice, it whispered, "Let me in." I recoiled from the window as if struck, my breath tearing from my chest in short bursts. The lantern light quivered in my hand, casting the room into frantic shadows. The reflection stared back with unwavering calm, its lips curling into that grin I now knew too well. My heart thundered, and for a moment I considered shattering the glass with the butt of my rifle. But fear rooted me still. What if breaking the window allowed it inside? What if the barrier was not the wood or the nails, but the fragile boundary of glass itself? I stumbled back, retreating to the farthest corner of the cabin, pressing my spine against the cold log walls. The reflection did not vanish. It remained, lips moving though no sound carried. My own face, twisted with hunger, mouthing words I refused to read. I squeezed my eyes shut, and when I opened them again, the glass was dark and empty. Sleep eluded me that night. I sat awake until dawn, rifle across my knees, waiting for the cabin walls to betray me. When morning light finally spilled across the floorboards, relief did not come. For outside, spread across the snow like a grotesque message, lay dozens of animal skins, deer, wolf, coyote, all torn open and arranged in a circle around the cabin. The hides looked fresh, their edges still wet with blood, their hollowed faces turned toward me in mute accusation. I forced myself not to vomit as I stepped outside. My boots crunched against frozen sinew. The circle was deliberate, a boundary marked in death. I felt eyes on me from the trees, though none revealed themselves. Slowly, carefully, I gathered the hides, stacking them in a pile. I set them ablaze, the smoke thick and acrid, and whispered to the flames like a prayer, "You will not have me." Yet as the skin shriveled, I swore I heard laughter drifting on the wind, cruel and victorious. That day, I decided I could not remain. Supplies were dwindling, and my mind teetered closer to fracture with each hour. The nearest town lay 30 miles south, a grueling journey in deep snow, but better to risk exhaustion than madness. I packed what little I could carry: dried venison, a flask of water, ammunition, and a compass. By mid-afternoon, I locked the cabin behind me, knowing I might never return. The forest swallowed me quickly. Pines pressed close, their trunks skeletal in the winter light. My boots broke through crusted snow, each step a struggle. Still, I pressed on, rifle slung across my shoulder, breath clouding the frozen air. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of my passage. For hours, I saw no movement, but as dusk blotted across the horizon, I heard its footsteps behind me. I spun, rifle raised. Nothing but trees. Yet the sound had been unmistakable, heavy, deliberate, matching my pace. I hurried forward, heart racing. Again the steps followed, faster now, closer. Panic surged and I broke into a stumbling run, branches lashing my face, snow biting at my ankles. The forest darkened, and shadows grew long. When at last I dared to glance behind, I saw them. Figures, at least 3, loping between the treeples. Their limbs bent grotesquely, their hides flapping like banners. Their faces shifted as they ran. Sometimes wolf, sometimes deer, sometimes human, but always with that wide, pale grin. They did not hurry. They knew I could not escape. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning, legs trembling, until I stumbled into a narrow canyon. Sheer rock walls rose on either side, and the passage wound like a throat into darkness. I had no choice but to follow it, hoping it would lead to open ground. The air grew colder, stiller. My breath echoed, too loud. Behind me, the laughter began again. At last, the canyon opened into a small clearing, and there, at its center, stood a stone circle. 12 monoliths, weathered and ancient, rose from the earth. Their surfaces were etched with carvings I did not recognize. Spirals, claws, twisted faces. Snow had not settled within the circle. The ground was bare, as if the earth itself rejected it. The laughter ceased. Silence fell heavy, oppressive, waiting. I staggered forward, drawn despite myself. The stones hummed faintly, a vibration that prickled my skin. My head throbbed, vision swimming behind my eyes, faces shifting, skin stretching, teeth gnashing. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the bare ground. When I lifted my head, they were there. Dozens of them encircling the stones. Skinwalkers, some draped in hides, others twisted beyond recognition, their bodies long and broken. Their eyes gleamed with hunger, yet none stepped forward. They stood as if held at bay by the circle itself. A figure emerged from their ranks, taller than the rest, cloaked in a bear's skin, its head crowned with antlers. Its face shifted constantly, flowing from man to beast to woman to child, never settling. When it spoke, the voices overlapped. Mine, my sister's, my grandfather's, all entwined. You are ours, Nathaniel. You were marked before you were born. This land belongs to us, and so do you. I clutched my rifle, though my arms shook. Stay back, I rasped, but the words were hollow. The figure laughed, and the others echoed, a chorus of madness. You cannot kill what is already part of you, it said. Then it pointed at the stones. At first I thought it beckoned me closer, but then I understood. It feared them. The circle was not a prison for me, but a barrier against them. I scrambled to my feet, stepping fully into its center. The humming grew louder, filling my bones, steadying my breath. The skinwalkers hissed, retreating to the shadows. The antlered figure leaned close to the boundary, its grin splitting wider than a jaw should allow. The stones cannot protect you forever. When the snow melts, when the earth softens, we will take you. We are patient. We are eternal. With that, the figures melted back into the trees, leaving me alone in the circle. Darkness fell, and I sank to my knees, shaking, clutching the rifle to my chest. I do not know how long I remained there, half mad with exhaustion. At some point, I must have collapsed, for I woke to dawn light filtering between the stones. The forest was silent once more. My body ached, my lips cracked, my mind frayed. But I was alive. I made my way back to the cabin, stumbling like a drunkard, driven only by instinct. When at last it came into view, I felt no relief. Smoke curled from the chimney. The door hung ajar. I had not left it that way. Cautiously, I raised my rifle, edging closer. Inside, the fire crackled, the table was set, and food simmered in a pot upon the stove. At the head of the table sat myself. He looked up, smiling my smile. "Welcome home, Nathaniel. You've been gone so long. Sit. Eat." My finger tightened on the trigger, yet terror held me frozen. For his reflection grinned not in the glass but in the flesh, sitting where I should be, living where I no longer belonged. I stood in the doorway, my rifle trembling in my hands, staring at myself seated at the table. The fire cracked in the hearth, the smell of cooked meat rising, steam curling from the pot. My double lifted a spoon, sipping as though savoring a memory I had not lived. He smiled, my smile, though sharper, stretched too wide, as if the skin itself resisted holding that expression. "Sit," he said, voice warm, familiar. It was my own tone, the cadence I had known all my life. "You've walked far. You're tired. You need food." My throat closed, words clawing inside me but refusing to escape. My knees threatened to buckle, not from exhaustion, but from the dissonance of watching myself exist apart from me. His eyes never blinked, pale gleam catching the firelight, studying me with amusement. I aimed the rifle, but he only laughed, the sound echoing, doubling, as though the walls themselves laughed with him. "Bullets won't stop what you already are," he said. He gestured to the empty chair across the table. "Come. If you don't eat, you'll starve. If you starve, you'll give us what we want anyway. Better to join us on your feet." I shook my head, backing away a step. His grin widened. He set the spoon down carefully, deliberately, then rose. Every movement was mine, perfect in rhythm and posture, yet imbued with a mockery that chilled me deeper than any storm. "You think you built this cabin," he said, gesturing around, "but it was never yours. The land chose. It chooses still. You breathe our air, you drink our water, you walk on our soil. Every mouthful you've swallowed has been ours. You belong here because you've been eating us all along." My stomach lurched, bile burning my throat. He stepped closer, and I raised the rifle. My finger pressed the trigger. The explosion tore the room, smoke filling the air. His body jerked, then straightened, unharmed. The bullet hole smoked in the wall behind him. He chuckled, patting his chest. "Empty gestures, Nathaniel. We don't bleed like you do." He lunged forward. Reflex carried me back, my boots scraping wood as I stumbled outside into the snow. I ran blindly, crashing into the trees, branches tearing at my coat. His laughter followed, distant yet inside my skull. Every shadow became his face. Every echo was my voice. I don't know how long I ran before collapsing beside a fallen pine, gasping for air. My hands shook, the rifle slipping from my grip. The forest stretched endless, every direction a snare. Then the voices began again. First my sister's, pleading softly, then my mother's, then strangers whose tones I could not place. They wove together in a chorus, and at its center was my own, calm and steady, guiding me back. "Come home," it said. "The cold will kill you. The stones can't save you. Only we can." I pressed my palms against my ears, screaming until my throat shredded. When I opened my eyes, the figures stood around me. Not just one or two, but dozens. Shapes draped in hides, faces shifting. They circled like wolves, their pale eyes gleaming. My double stepped forward, grinning. "There is no escape, Nathaniel. You knew that when you came here. You felt it in your blood. This land is not inheritance. It's sacrifice. They closed in, hands reaching, claws gleaming in the moonlight. In desperation, I fumbled at my coat pocket and felt the cold edge of the compass. The needle spun wildly, refusing to settle, but as I gripped it, I remembered the stone circle. The humming, the barrier, the one place they had not dared enter. With a roar, I surged upward, swinging the rifle like a club, breaking through the circle of bodies. They shrieked, the sound tearing the night, and for a moment the path opened. I ran. Snow blinded me, branches clawed my face, but I ran, following nothing but the desperate pull of instinct. Behind me, they pursued, their forms shifting, bounding on all fours, howling with laughter. The stones rose at last through the trees, pale against the night. I flung myself into their circle, collapsing to my knees, gasping. The ground thrummed beneath me, the same hum as before, steady and strong. The skinwalkers halted at the edge, their faces twisting in fury. My double stepped closest, his grin wider than ever, teeth too many for a human mouth. "You can't live in there forever," he said. "Your food will rot, your water will freeze, your body will betray you. And when you die, when you finally close those eyes, we will feast." They circled, waiting, patient. I stayed within the stones, shivering, clutching the rifle that meant nothing. Days blurred. I melted snow for water, gnawed at the scraps in my pack, and listened as they prowled the boundary. Sometimes they would vanish for hours, and I would think foolishly that they had left. But always they returned. Sleep became torment. Dreams bled into waking. I saw my reflection in the stones, in the snow, in the shadows, always grinning, always whispering. Sometimes it told me to surrender. Sometimes it promised peace if I only stepped beyond the circle. My mind frayed, the edges crumbling like old paper. On the seventh night, hunger gnawed too sharp, and I staggered to my feet, swaying. The skins draped upon the figures outside fluttered in the wind. My double waited, calm, smiling. "It's easier if you don't fight," he said. "You're already halfway ours." "Look," he raised his hand, and I saw it the skin of my own arm, pale, stretched across his. The same scar from childhood, the burn mark from college, every detail perfect. My stomach twisted. He wore me already. I don't remember dropping the rifle. I only remember the cold, the humming stones, and the voices pressing closer. My vision swam, my breath slowed. My last coherent thought was that perhaps he was right. Perhaps I had been theirs from the beginning. When dawn came, I woke on the cabin floor. The fire burned steady. The table was set. Across from me in the chair sat my reflection, smiling gently. "You see," he said, "you came home after all." I did not move. I did not speak. I only stared, and in the silence, I could no longer tell if I was the one in the chair or the one watching. My name's Daniel Price, though almost everyone calls me Danny. I'm 26 years old, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. If you'd asked me 2 weeks ago what the scariest thing I'd ever experienced was, I probably would have said the time I spun out on the interstate during a snowstorm. Or maybe that night when the smoke alarm wouldn't stop beeping at 3 a.m. and I convinced myself there was some kind of electrical fire in the walls. What happened last Thursday makes all of that look like children's bedtime stories. To be honest, I almost didn't write this. There's a part of me that wants to keep my mouth shut, pretend it never happened, and hope whatever this thing is just forgets about me. But there's another part, the part that remembers the sound of my own name whispered from the dark corner of my living room. That can't stop thinking, what if it isn't just me? What if it's looking for others? That's why I'm here. I work nights at a shipping warehouse. and I usually get home around 11:30. My routine is clockwork: heat up some leftovers, scroll Reddit, or watch a dumb horror flick, and pass out on the couch. I'm not exactly a party animal. On Thursday, everything was normal. I dropped my keys in the dish by the door, nuked some cold pizza, and had just settled in with Netflix when I heard the knock. 3 knocks. Slow, steady. That's not unusual in itself. But here's the thing: nobody comes to my apartment. My neighbors are polite but distant, and my only friend in the building, Mark, was out of town visiting his parents. So when I heard those knocks, my first reaction was confusion. I got up, set my pizza on the counter, and went to the door. "Who is it?" I called, my voice a little sharper than I intended. Silence. Something about that silence made me uneasy. You expect at least a muffled response. "Sorry, wrong door," or "it's maintenance." Instead, the air just hung there, heavy and still. I pressed my eye to the peephole. There was a man standing in the hallway. His hoodie was pulled up, shadowing his face, but the overhead light made his skin look too pale. His head was tilted, just slightly, as if he was listening for something on the other side of the door. I should have turned away right then. Should have gone back to my couch, cranked up the TV, and ignored it. Instead, like an idiot, I said, "You've got the wrong apartment." That's when he lifted his hand and tapped the peephole. Tap. Tap. Something about those taps. It wasn't playful. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it was deliberate. Like he was saying, "I know you're there." I stepped back from the door. I should explain, I'm not a paranoid guy. I don't own a gun. I don't have pepper spray. Hell, I barely even lock the deadbolt half the time. But there was something about this man that set every nerve in my body screaming. Then he spoke. "Danny, let me in." My blood ran cold. I had never seen this man before in my life. "How do you know my name?" I demanded, my voice cracking. He chuckled. Not a warm chuckle. Not even a mean one. It was dry, hollow, like someone forcing air through a throat that hadn't laughed in a long time. "I've always known your name." I backed up toward the kitchen. My phone was on the counter. My hands were trembling as I grabbed it and dialed 911. The pounding started before the call connected. Not knocking anymore, slamming. The whole door shook in its frame. "Light Ian Denwy." The operator picked up. 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's someone at my door," I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper. "He knows my name? He?" I stopped, because when I glanced back toward the door, the peephole was black. Something was pressed against it, blocking out the hallway. And then, God help me, I heard the whisper, not from the hall, not from outside, from inside my apartment. "Danny." The phone slipped from my hands. The voice came again from the dark corner by my TV. The same tone, the same cadence as the man at the door. "Danny." I stumbled back, heart hammering. My apartment isn't big. 1 bedroom, tiny living space. But at that moment it felt like a maze. Every shadow stretched too far. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. I remember clutching the counter, trying to stay upright. And then, this is the part I can't explain. The door opened. I never touched the lock. I never turned the knob. But I heard the unmistakable creak of the hinges, and when I looked up, the door was swinging inward. The hallway beyond was empty, but the whisper in my apartment grew louder. "Danny." Then everything went black. When I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight poured through the blinds, harsh and too bright. My pizza was still sitting on the counter, congealed and cold. My phone showed a call log with 911, lasting 14 minutes. I don't remember talking for more than 30 seconds. And the door. It was shut. The chain lock was in place. As if nothing had happened. But something did happen. I can't convince myself it was a dream. Not when I keep hearing faint tapping at night. Not on the door anymore, but inside the walls. And not when I found the writing. That's the part I haven't told anyone yet. When I came home from work last night, there was something scrawled on the inside of my bathroom mirror. Letters traced through condensation, though I hadn't showered. 4 words. I'm already inside Danny. When I left off, I told you about the knocking. The man who somehow knew my name, and the whisper I heard from inside my apartment. I also told you about the words I found, traced into the condensation on my bathroom mirror. I'm already inside, Danny. That was Friday morning. Since then, I've been running on caffeine, paranoia, and pure survival instinct. Writing this down is the only thing that keeps me tethered to the idea that I'm not losing my mind. Because if I am losing it, if this is all in my head, then I don't know how to explain what happened the past 2 nights. I called out of work Friday. My manager didn't like it. But I couldn't spend 8 hours lifting boxes and pretending I wasn't terrified of going home. I spent most of the day pacing around my apartment, checking the locks, opening and closing every cabinet like maybe something had crawled inside them. Every so often, I'd hear it. Tap, tap, always faint, always somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. Sometimes the wall by the couch, sometimes the bathroom pipes. Once, horrifyingly, I swear it came from inside my closet. By Friday night, I was losing my grip. I decided to do something practical, check the building's security cameras. My landlord had bragged about the new system. Last year, even though it was just a couple of grainy cameras in the lobby and hallways. Still, I figured if someone had been standing outside my apartment pounding on the door, the cameras would have picked it up. So I walked downstairs to the tiny management office. Mrs. Albright, the landlady, was sitting behind her desk, chain smoking like she always did. She rasped, squinting at me through the smoke. Something wrong. Yeah, someone came to my apartment Thursday night. Weird guy. Knew my name. Scared the hell out of me. I was wondering if I could take a look at the footage. She frowned. Did you call the cops? Yeah, I did. But by the time they would have shown up, he was gone. That part was a Lee. I hadn't waited for police at all, too freaked out by the whisper in my living room. But she didn't need to know that. She sighed, stubbed out her cigarette, and pulled up the feed on her old desktop. Which camera? 4th floor, outside 4B. Around midnight. She clicked around until grainy black and white footage filled the screen. My hallway timestamp blinking. We watched. At exactly midnight, there I was, me, in my sweatpants, walking up to my own door, fumbling for my keys. I remembered that part. Then nothing. For over an hour, the hallway stayed empty. Nobody knocked. Nobody in a hoodie. Nobody at all. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. See, she said. Probably just a dream. But I remembered the pounding, the voice, the blackened peephole, the whisper inside. That wasn't a dream. Could you rewind a little more? I asked, my voice cracking. Like back to 11:30. She gave me a skeptical look but rewound. There I was again, entering the building. The lobby doors swung shut. The hallway was empty. But as I watched closely, I saw something strange. The camera glitched. Just for a second, a horizontal line of static tore across the screen, and in that flicker, I thought I saw a shape. Not a man, not anything human, exactly, Just a blur, standing in the hall, facing my door. Then it was gone. I swallowed hard. "See that?" I asked, pointing. Mrs. Albright squinted. "That's just the feed acting up. Cheap system. Doesn't mean anything. But it meant something to me. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my apartment. I went to my buddy Mark's place across town. He was still at his parents', so I had the couch to myself. I locked every door, drew the blinds, and tried to tell myself I was safe. But at 3:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of someone whispering my name. I shot upright. The living room was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs, and then I realized something. The whisper hadn't come from inside the apartment. It had come from my phone. I picked it up from the coffee table. The screen was dark. No notifications, but as soon as I touched it, the whisper came again, faint but clear through the speaker. "Danny." I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the sound far too loud in the silent apartment. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Saturday morning, I did what any sane person would do. I went to the police. I told them about the man at my door, about how he knew my name, about the writing on my mirror. I left out the part about the whisper coming from my phone. I didn't want to get thrown in the psych ward. But I begged them to send someone to check my apartment. The officer, a guy named Reynolds, humored me. We drove back to my place. He walked through every room, checked the closets, even crawled into the attic crawl space. "Nothing. Locks are intact," he said. "No sign of forced entry. My guess? Some neighbor messing with you. Or maybe you had a bad dream. Happens." I wanted to scream at him. Instead, I just nodded. He gave me his card. "Call if it happens again." As soon as he left, I noticed something new. My bathroom mirror had another message. This time, the words were longer, scratched faintly into the glass itself, as if by a fingernail. "You can't hide in other houses, Danny. I'll always find you." My stomach turned. It had known where I was last night, at Mark's place. I tried to hold it together through Saturday, but by nightfall, I was shaking. Every sound in the apartment made me jump. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me. I turned on all the lights, even in the bathroom, just to keep the dark at bay. Around 1 a.m., exhaustion finally pulled me under. I must have dozed off on the couch, because I woke to silence and darkness. The lamps I'd left on were all off. My TV was off. My phone screen was black. The power had gone out. That's when I heard the tapping. Not on the walls this time. Not in the closet. On the couch. Right beside my head. I froze, holding my breath. My skin prickled as something brushed against my ear. Soft, cold, and deliberate. "Danny," it whispered. I bolted upright, fumbling in the dark, my hands smacking against cushions and empty air. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and whipped it around the room. Nothing. But when the beam passed over the mirror above my TV, I saw words scrawled across it in tall, jagged letters, STOPRUNING. I don't remember much after that. I think I fainted. When I came to, it was morning again. The lights worked. The words on the mirror were gone, but the fear stayed. And now I'm sitting here, writing this, realizing something I've been trying not to admit. It doesn't matter if I move apartments. It doesn't matter if I leave the city, the state, the country. This thing isn't outside trying to get in. It's already inside. I didn't go into work on Sunday or Monday. I told my boss I was sick, but the truth is, I couldn't bring myself to leave my apartment. Every time I thought about stepping out into the daylight, I pictured coming back and finding something waiting inside. Or worse, finding nothing at all, but knowing it had followed me anyway. I've been eating canned soup and stale cereal, barely sleeping, just pacing the apartment like a prisoner. I know it sounds insane, but here's the thing, I'm not the only one anymore. Other people have seen it. Sunday afternoon, there was a knock on my door. My heart nearly shot out of my chest. I froze, staring at the door, remembering the last time I'd heard knocking. But this time, a voice followed, "Danny, it's Mrs. Patel." Mrs. Patel lives across the hall. Sweet old lady, always bakes too many cookies at Christmas. I hesitated, then opened the door just a crack, chain still on. She was standing there in her floral housecoat, clutching a grocery bag. "Danny," she said, peering at me through her thick glasses. "Is everything all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." She frowned. "I thought you had company." My skin prickled. "What do you mean?" "I heard voices from your apartment last night," she said. "Deep voices. I like you. And I saw someone through your window. Tall man, wearing a hood. He was just standing there, staring out." I slammed the door shut before I even thought about it. But she was right. I live alone. Nobody was here last night. And I hadn't opened my blinds in days. So how the hell did she see someone in my window? That night, I tried something new. If I couldn't trust my memory, maybe I could trust technology. I downloaded a sound recorder app on my phone and set it on the coffee table before collapsing onto the couch. I left it running all night. Monday morning, I played it back. For the first 20 minutes, it was just me tossing and turning, the occasional creak of the couch. Then, around 12:43 a.m., I heard it, a whisper. Not once, not twice, but over and over. "Danny, Danny, Danny." Sometimes close to the microphone, sometimes farther away, like it was circling the room. At 1:12 a.m., the whispering stopped. For about 30 seconds, there was silence. Then a sound so loud I almost dropped the phone, a voice, deep and guttural, growling directly into the mic. "Stupojo." The recording ended abruptly after that. No static, no battery dying. Just cut off, like something didn't want me to hear more. I told myself it had to be a glitch, some interference. But then I noticed something on the recording screen that made my blood run cold. The app logs sound levels in little bars. At 1:12 a.m., when the deep voice spoke, the bar spiked so high it maxed out. Louder than any sound I could possibly make in this apartment. And right before it cut off, I heard another sound. Barely audible, buried under the growl. The click of my door unlocking. By Monday night, I was spiraling. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through Reddit, convincing myself maybe I'd find someone else with a similar story. But as I scrolled, my laptop screen flickered. Lines of static raced across it. Then, just for a second, my reflection in the darkened screen changed. It wasn't me. Same hoodie as the man from the hallway. Pale, stretched face. Head tilted. And it was smiling. I slammed the laptop shut. Around 2 a.m., my phone rang. The screen said, "Unknown caller." Against my better judgment, I answered. At first, nothing. Just static. Then, "Danny." I hung up, heart pounding. The phone rang again immediately. This time, I didn't answer, but a voicemail appeared. I forced myself to play it, hands shaking. At first, static again. Then that same guttural voice, "IMINSID." Then silence. Except not silence, because underneath the static I could hear my own voice, breathing. As if the phone had been recording me in real time. I didn't sleep at all after that. When the sun rose, I thought maybe daylight would make me feel safer. It didn't, because when I went to make coffee, I found another message, this time carved directly into the wood of my kitchen table.
OPM TTO.
Or I didn't carve it. Nobody else has keys. But it was there. Deep grooves, as if cut with something sharp. Tuesday morning, I finally broke down and called Mark. I hadn't told him much before, just that I'd had a break and scare. But now I spilled everything. The man at the door, the whispers, the recordings, the messages. Jesus, Danny, he said, you sound like you're about to lose it. I am losing it. I snapped, but it's real, Mark. I've got proof. I'll send you the recording, he sighed.
Okay.
Send it. And, look, maybe you should come stay with me for a while, just to clear your head. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But then I remembered the message on my bathroom mirror. You can't hide in other houses, Danny. I'll always find you. If it followed me once, it could follow me again. Still, I promised I'd think about it, but I didn't send him the recording, because when I opened the file again, it was gone. Not deleted, not corrupted, just gone. In its place was a new file, same timestamp, same length. I pressed play with trembling fingers. It wasn't the recording I'd made. It was me, sleeping on the couch, and someone standing over me, breathing. That brings me to now. Tuesday night. I'm writing this in the dark, because the lights keep flickering anyway. My phone keeps buzzing with calls from unknown, and I'm too afraid to answer. A few minutes ago, I heard Mrs. Patel again. She knocked on my door, calling my name, but when I checked the peephole, she wasn't there. Just the man in the hoodie, head tilted, smiling. And when I backed away, I heard her voice again, muffled through the door. Danny, open the door. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if my neighbors are alive, if my own voice is even mine, if my apartment is just a box this thing crawled inside. All I know is it wants me to open the door. And I don't think it means the one in my hallway. I think it means something deeper. Some door inside me, and I'm terrified that sooner or later I will. By the time Wednesday came around, I stopped pretending I was okay. I looked like hell, sunken eyes, shaky hands, a stench of sweat and fear I couldn't scrub off. I hadn't slept more than an hour in days. Food barely stayed down. I was surviving on adrenaline and coffee, pacing my apartment like a caged animal, and the thing was getting bolder. It started before dawn. I was sitting at my table, staring at the gouged-in words. OPH door, when I heard it. Not the usual tapping, not the whisper of my name. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps circling the apartment. Not in the hallway, no. Inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the plaster. For a moment's silence. Then the sound came again, directly behind the thin sheetrock. Heel-toe. Heel-toe. Like something pacing, waiting for me to notice. I backed away and shut myself in the bathroom, heart jackhammering. And that's when I saw the mirror. A new message, written across it in jagged strokes. Not traced through condensation this time. This was etched, deep and permanent. ALMOSTRADY. I couldn't take it anymore. I called Officer Reynolds, the cop who'd checked my place before. My voice cracked as I begged him to come back. Mr. Price, he said with that weary cop tone. We didn't find any forced entry last time. I think what you need is a good night's rest. Maybe even. Don't you dare say hospital. I snapped. I have proof. He sighed. What kind of proof? I didn't want to tell him about the recordings. They were gone now, replaced by whatever the hell that thing wanted me to hear. So instead, I blurted the only thing I had left. My neighbor saw him. Mrs. Patel. She saw the man in my apartment. There was a pause. Mrs. Patel. Reynolds asked.
Yes!
Across the hall, 4C. Ask her.
She'll tell you. Another pause.
Longer this time. Mr. Price? He said, carefully. Apartment 4C has been vacant for over a year. Mrs. Patel passed away last spring. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. No, I talked to her. She knocked on my door. I think you should come down to the station, Reynolds said gently. We can get you some help. I hung up before he could finish. That evening, I decided to prove to myself I wasn't insane. I went across the hall. Apartment 4C's door was dusty, paint peeling, handle cold to the touch. I knocked anyway. No answer. I twisted the knob. It wasn't even locked. The door creaked open, revealing darkness and the faint smell of mildew. The place was empty. No furniture, no curtains. Just bare floors and cracked walls. But in the middle of the living room was a single chair. And sitting on the chair, facing the door, was a grocery bag. The same kind Mrs. Patel had been holding when I saw her. Inside were stale, moldy cookies. I slammed the door shut and ran back to my apartment, my stomach churning. That night was the worst yet. At 200 a.m., I woke to find my couch moved. Not by much, just a few inches from where it had been. At 20:45, the kitchen chairs were stacked on top of the table, all facing the bathroom. At 30:10, my TV turned itself on, playing nothing but static, the volume maxed. I pulled the plug. The screen went black. And in that black reflection, I saw the man in the hoodie, standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But when I looked back at the TV, the reflection was still there, smiling. At dawn, I finally snapped. I couldn't stay here another second. I packed a duffel bag with clothes, my phone, my wallet, and bolted. The hallway felt wrong. Too quiet. The buzzing light overhead flickered, shadows twitching along the walls. I didn't wait for the elevator. I sprinted down 4 flights of stairs and burst into the lobby. But the lobby wasn't empty. A woman was standing there. Not Mrs. Patel, not anyone I recognized. Tall, gaunt, with stringy black hair. She wore the same hoodie as the man outside my door. "Danny," she whispered, her head tilting in that unnatural way. I stumbled backward, my duffel bag dropping to the floor. Her mouth stretched too wide, lips tearing at the corners, smile splitting her face like rotten fabric. Then she blinked, and she was gone. The lobby was empty. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across town. I collapsed on a park bench, gasping for air, sweat dripping down my back. Morning commuters streamed past, oblivious to the nightmare tearing me apart. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. I was out, away, and then my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. With trembling hands, I pressed play. Static. Then my own voice, strained and whispering, "Stop running, Danny. You'll only make it worse." I dropped the phone, bile rising in my throat, because I hadn't spoken those words. And yet it was my voice. I didn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't. Instead, I called Mark. This time I begged him outright. "Please, man, I can't be alone anymore. Can I crash at your place? Just for a night." He hesitated, but eventually agreed. "Fine. But you better explain what the hell's going on." I took a bus to his apartment. Every time the bus slowed at a stoplight, I swore I saw someone outside. Hoodie pulled up, pale face turned toward me. But when I blinked, they were gone. By the time I reached Mark's, I was a wreck. He opened the door, gave me one look, and muttered, "Jesus, you look like death." I collapsed on his couch, too drained to answer. For a few hours, things seemed normal. We ordered pizza. He let me rant, even though I could see in his eyes he thought I'd lost it. But at least I wasn't alone. Until midnight, the power cut out. Mark cursed, fumbling for a flashlight, probably a blown fuse. But I knew better, because in the dark I heard it, that whisper, not just once, a chorus. Danny! 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 Voices all around us, pressing against the walls, seeping through the cracks, filling the room. Mark's flashlight flicked on, beam shaking. His face was pale. What the fuck was that? Before I could answer, the mirror on the wall cracked. Words formed across the shattered glass, jagged and glowing faintly in the dark. THDOS, open ING. We didn't sleep. Couldn't. When morning came, Mark looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. Okay, he said. I believe you. But what the hell does it want? I shook my head. I don't know. I think it wants me to let it in. Not here. Not the apartment door. Something else. Some other door. And if you don't? He asked. I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew. If I didn't open it, it would open it for me. That was last night. Today, I'm sitting in Mark's apartment, writing this while he paces nervously. We tried to leave earlier, but every time we touched the doorknob, the whisper started again. It's trapping us. And I just checked the bathroom. The mirror in his apartment has a new message. TOIGH. When I first started writing all this down, I thought it was just a way to cope. A diary for the damned. Maybe if I got the words out, the thing that's been haunting me would loosen its grip. But after what happened last night, I know the truth. This was never about coping. It was about confession. And maybe it was about warning the rest of you before it's too late. Mark and I didn't leave his apartment after I saw the message on his mirror. Tone IGHT. We didn't even try. The whispering had started as soon as the sun went down, circling the apartment like wolves around a campfire. Sometimes it was one voice, sometimes dozens, all murmuring my name. Danny. Danny. Every time Mark tried to speak above a whisper, they grew louder, drowning him out until we both just sat in silence, waiting. By midnight, the walls themselves seemed alive. The plaster bulged, as if something was pushing from the other side, desperate to get in. Cracks spread across the ceiling like veins, and then the footsteps began, heavy, deliberate, pacing the hallway outside. Back and forth, every step synchronized with the pounding of my heart. Mark grabbed a kitchen knife. His hands were shaking so bad, I thought he'd cut himself. We can't just sit here, man. We've got to do something. What do you want me to do? I snapped, my voice raw. This isn't something we can fight. It's not a burglar. It's not even fucking human. He didn't argue. He knew I was right. But then the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The same knocks I'd heard that first night at my own door. This time, though, it wasn't at the front door. It was at the bathroom. Mark's flashlight beam shook as we both turned toward it. The bathroom door rattled on its hinges, the wood straining under invisible fists. Danny, the chorus whispered. Danny, let us in, Mark shouted, his voice breaking. Get the fuck out! The knocking stopped. Silence. Then, from the bathroom, a new sound. The squeal of hinges. The door was opening, on its own. Mark lunged forward, slammed the door shut, and braced his weight against it. Don't just stand there! He screamed. I stumbled over, pressing my shoulder against the wood. For a moment, it felt like we were holding back a hurricane. Something massive and furious pressed from the other side, the door bowing inward. Then, just as suddenly, the pressure stopped. Mark gasped, sweat dripping down his face. What the hell is it? I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew. It wasn't trying to get into the bathroom. It was trying to get out. We backed away, knives useless in our hands, staring at that silent door. The air grew colder, every breath hanging in pale fog. My phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with a new voicemail notification. Without thinking, I played it on speaker. Static. Then my own voice. "It's not the apartment door, Danny. You know which one it is." Mark looked at me, horrified. "What the fuck does that mean?" I swallowed hard. My throat felt raw, every word like glass. "It means the door isn't out there," I whispered. "It's in me." The realization hit like a freight train. Every whisper, every reflection, every message. It had never been about breaking into my home. It was about breaking into me. The door was something inside my head, my soul, whatever you want to call it. And bit by bit, this thing had been prying it open. "Danny," the chorus whispered again. "Danny, let us in." Mark backed away from me, knife trembling in his grip. "Don't let it, man. Don't fucking let it." But I could feel it. A pressure in my chest, like something clawing from the inside. My vision blurred, black shapes crawling at the edges. My own reflection in the darkened TV flickered. Me, but not me. Hood pulled up, head tilted. That awful smile. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. The voices swelled, louder and louder, filling the apartment until it felt like my skull would split. "Teach? Door." Mark shouted something. I don't even remember what. He tried to pull me up, tried to drag me away from myself, I guess. And then everything went silent. The voices cut off mid-word. The pressure vanished. For the first time in days, my head was clear. I opened my eyes, and the apartment was empty. No cracks in the ceiling, no whispering walls, no looming shadows. Just me and Mark, standing there in stunned silence. He let out a shaky laugh. "Jesus Christ. Is it gone?" I wanted to believe him. I wanted to say yes. But then my phone buzzed again. One new voicemail. Mark shook his head. Don't fucking listen to it." But I had to. I put it on speaker. This time, no static, no distorted growl, just my voice. Calm, clear. "Thanks for opening the door, Danny." I don't remember much after that. I think I blacked out. When I came to, it was morning. The apartment was spotless. No cracks, no writing, no overturned furniture. Mark was gone. His knife was still on the floor, but no sign of him. I called his name until my throat bled. Nothing. He didn't come back. I checked his building's security cameras later that day. Around 3 a.m., the feed glitched. Horizontal lines of static tearing across the screen. And for a split second, you can see it. Me, not the real me, the other one. Hoodie up, head tilted, smiling, walking out of Mark's apartment. And Mark walking behind me, glassy-eyed, like a puppet on strings. That was 3 days ago. Nobody's seen Mark since. His phone goes straight to voicemail. The police say he probably took off. But I know better. Because last night, I got another voicemail. This time, it wasn't just my voice. It was Mark's. He sounded calm, happy even. "We're waiting, Danny. There's still more doors to open. I don't know how long I have left. The door inside me is wide open now. I can feel them moving in and out, whispering in my blood. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, it's not even me staring back anymore. I'm writing this here because maybe once I'm gone, someone else will find it. Maybe you'll understand what to do before it's too late. If you ever hear knocking in the middle of the night, don't answer it. If you ever hear your name whispered from inside your own home, don't listen. And if you ever feel something clawing inside you, begging to be let in, don't open the door. Because once you do, it's not just you they'll take. It's everyone around you. My name is Daniel Mercer, though most people on the road just call me Mercer, because truckers rarely bother with first names. I am 45 years old, born in a small, coal-dusted town in Pennsylvania, and I've been driving 18-wheelers for nearly 20 years. The highways are my second home, and in many ways, they are more familiar to me than the walls of my rented apartment in Harrisburg. I know the rhythm of the road, the loneliness of the night shift, the way the asphalt hums beneath the weight of a rig carrying 30 tons of freight. To me, highways are living veins stretched across America, pumping commerce, stories, and sometimes secrets. I introduce myself with formality because names matter. A name grounds a person. When you spend nights barreling down endless strips of blacktop with only the voice of a CB radio or static-filled AM station for company, it is easy to lose yourself in the anonymity of truck stops, mile markers, and shadows. My name is what separates me from becoming just another ghost on the road. That distinction will become important because not every traveler I've met was meant to be there, and not every road I've driven should have existed. On the evening my story begins, I had been tasked with hauling a shipment of industrial tools from Pittsburgh to a distribution center outside of Indianapolis. It was a route I had taken more times than I could count, familiar enough that I could almost drive it blindfolded, though of course, I never would. The usual path followed Interstate 70, a monotonous ribbon of highway with a mix of endless cornfields, the occasional gas station, and lonely exits that led to small towns barely clinging to life. Nothing remarkable ever happened there, at least not until this trip. The night air was cool, autumn settling in, carrying with it the faint smell of harvested fields. I had filled my thermos with strong, black coffee before leaving Pittsburgh, and the taste lingered bitter on my tongue. My dashboard clock read 11:14 p.m. I still had 5 hours of driving before I planned to stop for the night at a rest area I favored, just west of Columbus. The roads were clear, traffic sparse, and the sky overhead was a black expanse freckled with faint stars. It should have been an ordinary night. I was somewhere past Zanesville, the steady monotony of the drive pulling me into that half, aware trance truckers know too well, when I noticed something unusual. The GPS unit on my dashboard, a reliable tool I kept updated religiously, suddenly suggested an alternate route. A thin purple line cut southward, away from I-70, and rejoined the highway further west, supposedly shaving off 30 minutes of travel time. I frowned at it. I didn't recall there being any major bypasses or connectors in that stretch. I leaned closer, reading the name Route 117 South. That number meant nothing to me. I had no memory of such a road existing. Still, the GPS insisted it was faster, and curiosity tugged at me. Truckers aren't fond of detours. We like predictability. But there was something compelling about it, a nagging pull at the back of my mind. I told myself it was just the monotony of the interstate making me crave novelty. Against my better judgment, I flicked on my turn signal and eased the truck onto the exit ramp that pointed toward Route 117 South. The ramp was longer than I expected, winding down into a heavily wooded area. My headlights carved tunnels through dense trees, their leaves fluttering like paper in the night breeze. At the bottom of the ramp, I merged onto a 2-lane blacktop road. The pavement was fresh, smooth, and well-marked, as though it had been laid recently. Yet something about it felt wrong, almost too perfect, as though it hadn't yet been touched by wear or weather. The deeper I drove, the quieter everything became. Highways usually hum with some background noise, the rush of passing cars, distant lights of houses, even the faint echo of aircraft above. But here, nothing, just my rig, the steady thrum of the engine, and trees pressing close on either side. No road signs, no billboards, no gas stations. Just asphalt stretching into a darkness that seemed unnaturally thick. After 20 minutes, unease settled in my chest. I flicked on the CB radio, hoping to catch chatter from other drivers, but all I heard was static. Even the AM radio failed me, every station dissolving into hissing white noise. My GPS, once insistent, now displayed nothing but a blank grid where the road should have been. I muttered aloud, the sound of my own voice a relief in the suffocating silence. Well, Mercer, you've gone and done it. Took the road less traveled. Real damn less traveled. I considered turning back, but the road was narrow, and my trailer stretched long behind me. Reversing wasn't an option, and I hadn't seen a single turnout wide enough for a U-turn. The only choice was to push forward and hope the road spat me out near the interstate again. That was when I saw the first sign. A weathered wooden marker appeared on the right shoulder, illuminated briefly by my headlights. It bore no words, only a crude, hand-painted arrow pointing straight ahead. Beneath it, nailed sloppily to the post, was another board with something scrawled in faded red paint STA, ONTHE Roadie. I slowed the truck, squinting at it as it flashed by in my mirrors. A chill crawled down my spine. It had the unmistakable look of a warning, not a highway directive. Who had painted it, and for whom? I pressed the accelerator, eager to leave it behind. The road stretched on, featureless, my headlights chasing endless blacktop. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. My coffee had gone cold, but I sipped it anyway, needing the comfort of the ritual. Then, in the edge of my headlights, I noticed movement. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as I drew closer, I saw a figure standing just off the shoulder. It was a man, thin and tall, wearing clothes too dark to catch much detail. He stood perfectly still, arms at his sides watching me. His face was pale, ghost-like, reflecting the beams of my lights. I instinctively honked the horn. A long, low blast that rattled through the trees. The figure didn't flinch, didn't move at all. My truck roared past, and when I glanced in the side mirror, the shoulder was empty. A nervous laugh escaped me. Great. Seeing things now. Real professional Mercer. But the laughter didn't last, because a mile later there he was again. Same pale face, same rigid stance. Standing in the same spot relative to the road, as though he had never left. I gripped the wheel tighter, my palms damp with sweat. I pressed harder on the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb. My rig wasn't built for high-speed chases, but I needed distance from whatever that was. Yet no matter how far I drove, the figure kept reappearing, always standing at the edge of my headlights, always watching. My mind scrambled for explanations. Hallucination, fatigue, some trick of the night. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong with this road, with this entire detour. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I spotted another sign. This one was metal, bent and rusted, planted firmly in the ground. The reflective surface caught my headlights, and 4 words screamed back at me, THEHEHGRY. The words burned in my brain. My mouth went dry. For the first time in my career, I considered abandoning my rig. The thought was unthinkable. Truckers don't leave their loads. But the idea of staying on that road with that presence dogging me felt worse. I imagined stopping, climbing down into the oppressive silence, and finding the pale man waiting in the dark, just beyond the trees. I shook my head violently, forcing my focus back to the road. Stay on the road, I whispered, repeating the painted words from the earlier sign like a mantra. Just stay on the road. The blacktop stretched on endlessly, and I realized with mounting horror that I hadn't seen an intersection, a side road, or even an exit ramp in hours. It was as though the highway had swallowed me whole, and maybe it had. I've always believed highways are meant to lead somewhere. Even the most backwoods county roads eventually spit you out in a town, a gas station, a dirt track leading to someone's farm. But this road, Route 117 South, or whatever the GPS had called it, wasn't leading anywhere. It was leading deeper. That was the only word I could find for it. Deeper into dark woods that pressed closer against the shoulders, deeper into silence so thick I started turning down the hum of my engine just to remind myself I wasn't deaf. The sign still burned in my memory. The high gasquas ha apple. It echoed in my head with every rotation of the tires, and I swear the words began to sound like they belonged to the asphalt itself, like the road had whispered them through the rusted sign. I don't scare easy. Not after 20 years of hauling through storms, jackknifed wrecks, late night shady rest stops where guys offered you things best not spoken aloud. But I'll admit it, by then, I was afraid. My palms were slick on the wheel, my jaw clenched tight, and every instinct screamed at me to turn around. Only problem was there was nowhere to turn. I tried the radio again, still static. I tried my cell phone, no signal. Not even a single bar, just a dead screen with the useless words, "No service." That's when I realized I was alone. Not just alone in the truck, but alone in a way that went beyond isolation. It was like the world I knew, the interstate, the towns, the truck stops, was gone. I was in some pocket where only this road existed, and I was not the only thing using it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks, but then I noticed shapes in the tree line. Not figures this time, not the pale man. Something else. Shadows that were too large, too hunched, their edges jagged, moving in ways trees didn't move. They stayed just out of the beam of my headlights, but they kept pace with me. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator. 80, 85. The rig wasn't meant for that kind of speed, but I couldn't help it. I wanted distance. I wanted those things out of my periphery. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the woods ended. The road opened into a wide clearing, and to my shock, I saw buildings. An entire town lay ahead. Dim streetlights, a row of storefronts, a water tower in the distance. Relief flooded me. Civilization. People gasped, maybe even a police station. I slowed, scanning for a name. Most towns announced themselves with a green sign. This one didn't. I eased the rig into what looked like a main street. The headlights swept over darkened shopsy. A diner with peeling paint, a hardware store with cracked glass, a gas station with pumps so old they still had rolling number dials instead of digital screens. Every building looked abandoned. I leaned forward in my seat, squinting. No cars, no movement, not even a dog barking. Then I noticed the details. The diner's sign read OPN 24 AURs, but the letters were arranged backward, like I was reading them in a mirror. The gas station's price board listed numbers that made no sense, 3.66, 4.99, 1.02, 999, all stacked with no order, and the water tower in the distance. Instead of a town name, it bore a single word in dripping black paint, EFE. I slammed the brakes and the rig hissed to a stop in the middle of the road. My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't civilization. This wasn't salvation. This was bait. As if to prove the thought, a light flickered on inside the diner. I froze, staring. A dim glow filled the greasy windows, and for a moment I thought I saw shapes moving inside. Human shapes. My instinct told me to drive past, keep going, but some part of me, the part that still clung to reason, argued that maybe, just maybe, someone could explain what was happening. I shifted the truck into neutral, set the brake, and climbed down from the cab. The air outside hit me cold and damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth. My boots echoed against the cracked asphalt as I approached the diner. The closer I got, the more wrong it looked. The door wasn't glass but polished metal, reflecting me in a warped funhouse stretch. The "Open" sign buzzed with a sickly green light, and as I reached for the handle, I realized the shapes moving inside weren't moving at all. They were mannequins, dozens of them, seated at tables, posed mid-bite with plates of rotten food before them. The stench hit me then, thick and sour. The mannequins' faces were painted with crude smiles, their glassy eyes fixed on the door like they'd been waiting for me. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My truck suddenly felt miles away. Then one of the mannequins blinked. I swear it. The eyelids closed, opened again, slow and deliberate. Its painted grin widened, stretching unnaturally across its face. That broke me. I bolted back to the rig, my boots pounding against the pavement. The silence of the town broken only by the frantic rasp of my breath. I climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and gunned the engine. As the diner faded in my mirrors, I saw the door swing open. Figures stepped out, not mannequins anymore, but people, or things shaped like people, walking stiffly into the street, watching me leave. I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. My rig thundered through the town, past storefronts that seemed to shift as I passed. One moment a barber shop, the next a funeral parlor. Windows reflected faces I knew weren't mine. At the end of the street, the road narrowed again, slipping back into black forest. I drove until my eyes blurred and my body ached, until the clock on the dashboard rolled past 3 a.m. The town was long gone, but the fear hadn't left me. I kept expecting the pale man to appear again, or worse, for those mannequins. That weren't mannequins to be standing in the road waiting. But what I got was worse. The GPS flickered back to life. For a moment, I almost cried with relief. Maybe I was finding my way back. But when I looked closer, I saw the display had changed. There was no map, no highway grid, just a single black screen with words in glowing red letters THIGY. I swore and slapped the unit off the dash. It clattered to the floor, but the words burned in my head. That was when I realized the road had changed beneath me. The asphalt was no longer smooth. It bucked and rumbled under the tires like something alive, veins of red light glowing faintly in the cracks. My headlights caught glimpses of it pulsing, as though the road had a heartbeat. I pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to outrun it, but the steering wheel fought me. The rig drifted toward the shoulder no matter how I corrected. It was like the highway wanted control. The truck swerved, and for a split second, the trailer's weight pulled me toward the ditch. I yanked hard, muscles screaming, and the tires screeched back onto the blacktop. My chest heaved, adrenaline flooding every nerve. That's when the voice came. It wasn't on the radio. It wasn't outside. It was inside my head, low and guttural, vibrating in my bones. Stay on the road. Daniel. I almost drove off again from shock. It knew my name. My grip tightened, knuckles white. You don't get to tell me what to do. I snarled, though my voice cracked. The laugh that answered was deep, cavernous. You chose me. Now you drive until I'm done. I don't remember screaming, but my throat burned afterward. The rig roared forward, every instinct screaming to get away. The pale man appeared again, this time not on the shoulder, but standing directly in the lane. His face was clear now, blank. Smooth skin where features should have been. I braced for impact, but when the truck plowed through him, there was no thud, no crunch. He melted into smoke, slipping through the cab, through me, leaving a freezing cold that sank into my bones. And just like that, he was gone. The road stretched endlessly again, the forest returning, thicker now, branches clawing toward the cab. My headlights dimmed as though the darkness was swallowing them. That's when I realized what the sign had meant. The highway is hungry, and I was dinner. I gritted my teeth, fighting the urge to stop, to give in. My truck was more than a job. It was my life, my freedom, my anchor. If this road thought it could take that, it was in for a fight. But the truth was settling in, heavy and suffocating. I wasn't sure if I could fight a highway. The steering wheel shuddered, like it wanted to crawl out of my hands. Every mile I drove, The truck felt less like mine and more like an animal trying to buck its rider. The rig had always been my partner. Metal and rubber, sure but reliable, obedient. Now it groaned like it hated me, like I was trespassing in my own cab. The voice hadn't spoken again, but its silence was worse. It had left its words inside me, festering, and now every vibration of the road felt like a pulse underfoot. The highway was alive. I had no doubt anymore. The thought made my stomach knot. I checked my mirrors compulsively, half expecting to see the pale man hitching a ride on the trailer or mannequins crawling from the diner to chase me down the asphalt. But what I saw was worse. The mirrors didn't reflect the highway behind me anymore. They showed places I'd never been. On the left, I caught sight of a desert. Flat, endless sand dunes under a blood-red sky. On the right, a snowstorm raged, ice pelting against glass that wasn't there. My rig stayed warm and dry, but the reflections were wrong, impossibly wrong. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. Still there. Different scenes flickered each time I looked. Sometimes a swamp, trees dripping with moss. Sometimes a city on fire, skyscrapers melting like candles. Sometimes darkness so thick it looked like tar had been poured over the world. My stomach lurched. These weren't reflections. They were previews. Other places the highway could take me. I didn't want any of them. I pressed the accelerator harder, the speedometer needle pushing toward 90. My rig rattled, trailer swaying dangerously, but I couldn't stop. Not here. Not when the mirrors were showing me hell itself. The CB radio crackled. For the first time since I'd turned onto this cursed road, sound other than static hissed from the speakers. A man's voice, scratchy, distant, like it came from decades away. "Breaker, breaker," it rasped. "You shouldn't have taken the turn, Mercer." My blood froze. The radio never gave names unless someone called directly, and no one should have known mine. I grabbed the mic, my hand trembling. "Who is this? How the hell do you know my name?" The pause that followed stretched too long. Then, slowly, name's Harold. Drove for 22 years. Hauled steel, cattle, lumber, took care of my loads, same as you. And I made your mistake. I took the highway. The voice cracked, coughing like gravel. "It don't let you leave." I gripped the mic so hard my knuckles popped. "What is this place? Where the hell am I?" Silence. Static hissed, then Harold's voice returned, weaker now. "Don't matter where. Matters when. Highway don't run through space, Mercer. Runs through hunger. Every mile you drive feeds it. Every breath you take it owns." I slammed the mic down. I didn't want to hear any more, but the words stuck like hooks in my brain. I remembered the sign. Tichizuribalayas Sangarwai. My headlights flickered. For one terrifying second, the world went black. When the beams surged back, something stood in the road ahead. Not the pale man. Not mannequins. Something bigger. It was hunched, long-limbed, skin the color of ash. Its arms dragged across the asphalt, claws scraping sparks. Its face was stretched too tall, mouth opening and closing without sound, eyes bulging like headlights themselves. I swore, yanked the wheel, and the rig screamed as it veered. Tires shredded gravel, trailer fishtailed, the beast inches from my grill. Then it vanished, just gone, sucked back into the dark. My chest heaved, sweat pouring down my back. I realized with sick certainty that the road was testing me, playing with me, like a cat batting a mouse before it bit down. That was when the dashboard clock froze. 3:17 a.m. The second hand ticked once, then stopped. I tapped the glass, hit the dash, but it didn't move. Time itself had stalled. I whispered, "Jesus Christ." The voice came back. Not from the CB this time. From the passenger seat. Not Jesus. Daniel. I whipped my head around. The pale man sat there, smooth face gleaming in the dashboard light. His head tilted like a curious dog. Eyeless sockets staring where my face should be. I screamed, a raw, panicked sound, and slammed the accelerator. The truck howled forward, but he didn't budge, didn't sway with the motion. He was anchored there still and steady, like he'd always been part of the cab.
Get out!
I bellowed, slamming my fist against the steering wheel. This is my truck. The featureless face twitched, mouth splitting open. Black teeth filled the gap, rows upon rows. His voice gurgled out low and calm. Not anymore. I grabbed for the tire iron I kept behind the seat, swinging wildly. The iron whistled through empty air. He was gone. My breathing turned ragged. My knuckles hurt from how hard I gripped the wheel. I'd never felt powerless like this. I'd fought winter ice, hydroplaning, brake failures. Near head, ons with idiots who thought they could beat a semi at 60 miles per hour. But this wasn't machinery, wasn't weather. This was the highway itself, bleeding into me. I wanted to cry. Instead, I laughed. Short, hysterical bursts I couldn't control. The sound filled the cab like it belonged to someone else. And then, the road changed again. It widened. From 2 lanes, it spread into 4, then 6, then 12, stretching into a monstrous highway with no shoulders, no exits, no signs. My headlights couldn't catch the end of it. Asphalt stretched to infinity, glowing faintly red like an open wound. And I wasn't alone anymore. Trucks appeared in the other lanes, roaring past me at impossible speeds. Old models, Max, Peterbilts, Freightliners. Some so rusted they looked decades dead. Their drivers stared straight ahead, faces slack, skin gray. Some had no faces at all, just smooth skin like the pale man. I tried flashing my lights, honking, anything to make them notice me. Nothing. They barreled forward. Endless convoy in an endless night. One drew closer, matching my speed. I glanced over. The cab was shattered, windshield gone. The driver's seat held nothing but bones, still gripping the wheel. A CB Mac dangled from its jaw, swinging as if laughing. I nearly vomited. That was Harold. The radio crackled. His voice again, faint, fading. Mercer, don't let it take your name. The convoy swallowed me, rigs thundering on all sides. My little pocket of reality shrank. It felt like drowning in steel and diesel. I stomped the accelerator. My rig wailed, engine straining, trailer shaking. 95, 100, the convoy blurred, dissolving into streaks of rust and bone. And suddenly, I was alone again, but not free. The road sloped downward now, a descent so steep my stomach floated. Headlights revealed tunnels ahead, carved into the earth. Black mouths gaping open, waiting. The steering wheel tugged toward them. I yanked back, fighting with everything in me. My arms burned, sweat stinging my eyes. The wheel wanted the tunnels. The road wanted the tunnels. And then the voice filled the cab, louder than ever, shaking the glass. Feed me. I screamed back, raw fury mixing with terror. You picked the wrong driver, you son of a bitch. For the first time, the laughter faltered. The voice growled, low and uncertain. That gave me strength. I pulled harder, muscles tearing fire through my shoulders. The truck lurched, swerved, barely missing the tunnel mouths. Tires screeched as sparks flew. The rig shuddered like it might tear apart. But I stayed on the main road. For now. The asphalt hissed beneath me, cracks glowing brighter red, like embers in a furnace. The road was angry. I had denied its meal. But the worst part wasn't the road's fury. It was the realization sinking into me I could fight. But I couldn't win forever. The truck rattled like it might break apart beneath me, and for the first time in my career I prayed. Not for safety, not for a clear road, but for a way out of this hell. I prayed that somewhere, somehow, there was still an exit. The glowing cracks in the asphalt widened, bleeding red light like veins torn open. I could smell it now. A coppery tang that filled the cab, iron and smoke, like the stench of a slaughterhouse. The wheel trembled in my hands, alive with a will that wasn't mine. Feed me. The voice boomed again, shaking every bolt of the rig. My teeth ground together so hard they hurt. "I'm not your damn dinner." The road laughed, the sound deep and endless, rolling through my skull like thunder. Then, without warning, the headlights picked up something new. Signs. At last, signs. But these weren't highway markers. They were tall black, wrought iron poles with plates nailed crookedly onto them. White letters, painted in jagged strokes, flickered in my beams: EXAT1 GAVE UPXIT 2 DIE FEST, XAT 3D SOLO, XX Fort, Dot Shiar. The rig shook as if mocking me. None of them offered life. None offered freedom. They were jokes painted by the highway itself. My chest tightened. For the first time in 2 decades on the road, I didn't know if my rig would see another mile. I gripped the wheel tighter. "You want me hungry? Fine. You'll choke on me first." I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The speedometer needle buried itself past 100, shaking violently. The highway blurred, red cracks streaking past like rivers of lava. My eyes burned, vision tunneling. The road curved, twisted, but I refused to slow down. Something massive stirred in the distance. At first, I thought it was a mountain. But mountains don't move. Mountains don't breathe. This thing stretched up from the road itself, a silhouette bigger than skyscrapers, its body made of interwoven blacktop and glowing fissures. The highway had a body. The highway had a mouth, and it was opening wide. The asphalt ahead split, crumbling into a maw lined with jagged concrete teeth. Fire burned deep inside the chasm, and the voice thundered again. F.E. me. My truck was headed straight into it. I slammed the brakes. The trailer fishtailed. Smoke pouring from screaming tires. The wheel fought me, trying to drag me forward into the mouth. I screamed with it, every muscle in my arms and shoulders burning as I pulled against the living road. For one blinding second, I thought I'd fail, that the rig would tip, roll, and I'd slide straight into the furnace. But then, just then, something caught my eye. Another sign, not like the others. Small, wooden, half buried in weeds at the side of the road. It looked old, forgotten. Hand-painted letters, faded but legible. Stay on Teachiro 80, the same warning from before. But now I understood. It wasn't just a warning to keep my wheels between the lines. It was a rule, a loophole, a way to deny the thing what it wanted. If I stayed on the road, not the exits, not the tunnels, not the mouth, it couldn't take me. I grinned, wild and desperate. "You don't get me tonight." The highway roared, fury shaking the sky itself. Blacktop cracked and buckled, fissures erupting on either side. Shadows rose from the ditches, things with claws and teeth, mannequins with painted smiles. The pale man multiplied into dozens. They reached for the trailer, clambering onto the steps, pounding the cab. I held the wheel steady, kept the rig dead center. Hands slapped the glass, faces pressed against windows, grinning with too many teeth. The pale man's eyeless stare burned into me. The mirrors showed deserts, swamps, cities in flames. Every temptation, every horror screamed at me to falter. I didn't. "Come on," I snarled through clenched teeth. "Come on, you bastard. I'll drive you to death." The rig surged forward, tires screaming, frame rattling like it would collapse. But I kept it centered, mile after mile, even as the road split and twisted, even as shadows tried to claw me off. And then light. Up ahead, faint at first, then brighter. A glow that wasn't red, wasn't fire. It was pale, white clean. An overpass. Ordinary concrete unbroken with a green sign above it. I-70 Mubi ST1 Miel. Tears burned my eyes. My chest felt like it might burst. That was home. That was reality. The highway screamed again, louder than before. A sound that cracked the windshield, rattled the bones in my chest. "Oh, whoa, me." "No," I hissed, eyes locked on the overpass. "I'm Daniel Mercer, and you can't have me." The rig exploded through the shadows, blasting past clawing arms, through the roar of the living road. I aimed straight for that overpass, heart pounding. And then, just like that, it was over. The road smooth. The cracks vanished. The red glow died. I blinked. My rig hummed beneath me, steady as it always had. The night sky stretched above, stars calm and quiet. And there, plain as day, the green reflective sign glowed in my headlights. I-70 well est. I was back. My chest heaved, every breath ragged. My hands shook on the wheel, but the truck was mine again. The silence was real silence. Not suffocating, not alive. I didn't stop driving until dawn. Didn't dare. When the sun finally rose, I pulled into a rest stop outside Columbus and parked. My legs barely held me as I stumbled from the cab, lungs pulling fresh air like I'd never breathed before. Other truckers milled about, drinking coffee, stretching, checking tires. They looked normal, solid, alive. I wanted to tell them, to scream that the highway had tried to eat me, but the words stuck in my throat. Who would believe me? I barely believed myself. Instead, I just leaned against my rig, the metal warm in the morning light, and whispered to it, "Well, made it, girl. We made it back." But as I said it, I noticed something. The GPS on the dashboard had powered itself back on, yet the screen was blank, except for a single line of text in glowing red letters. Stay on Tiro AD. My blood ran cold, because the words weren't just a warning anymore. They were a promise. And I know deep down, one night soon I'll hear the highway calling again. My name is Dr. Nathaniel Cross, and I am a wildlife biologist specializing in predator ecology. For the past 12 years, I have studied wolves across North America, from the dense forests of the Upper Peninsula to the windswept plains of Montana. Yet nothing prepared me for what I found in the Alaskan interior. I came here under the guise of research, tracking packs, collaring individuals, mapping their range. But my true purpose became something else entirely. In those endless miles of tundra, glacial rivers, and jagged peaks, I encountered things that biology cannot explain, creatures that should not exist in any world bound by natural law. The job began like any other. My team had been granted temporary use of a ranger cabin deep inside Denali's wilderness, 50 miles from the nearest road. We were supplied by bush plane twice a month, and once the pilot lifted off, the silence of the wild folded around us. The air here carries a peculiar weight. The mountains loom as if alive, breathing with glaciers that groan at night, their echoes rolling through the valleys. I always thought of wilderness as empty space, waiting to be filled with data. Out here, though, it feels more like we're the ones being measured, scrutinized by something older than time itself. Our research focus was a pack reported to range along the Toklat River basin. Locals claimed it was unusually large, with rumors that some individuals rivaled the size of small ponies. Exaggerations, I assumed. Hunters always tell tall tales. Still, the data intrigued me, and I convinced the university to fund a full season of fieldwork. With me were 2 graduate students, Haley and Connor, and a field technician named Will, a former Marine who had traded deserts for tundra. 4 people against a land that stretched farther than the eye could dream. The first week passed with routine. We checked camera traps, logged scat samples, and mapped tracks. Wolves are ghosts of the wilderness, seen less often than heard. Their paw prints told us more than glimpses ever could: direction, speed, the age of the trail. Yet on our second week, something shifted. Tracks appeared that did not fit. At first glance, they seemed wolf-like, but the stride length was far too long. More disturbing was the shape: elongated, splayed toes, almost human in spread, but ending in sharp claw marks. Will frowned when he measured them, his tape trembling slightly in the wind. "That's not right," he muttered, then refused to say more. We set up additional cameras along the ridges. Nights grew colder, and the sky cracked open with auroras that shimmered like green fire. Beautiful, yes, but unsettling when paired with the silence. Wolves should have howled. Coyotes should have yipped. Instead, there was nothing. No birds, no insects. No sound but the rush of distant rivers. Even Haley, usually optimistic, admitted the stillness was unnatural. It feels like the whole valley is holding its breath, she whispered one evening as we logged data. I told her it was just the scale of Alaska. But deep down, I sensed she was right. The first anomaly came on the 12th night. At 12:14 a.m., one of the trail cameras captured movement near the tree line. I was reviewing footage when the image froze me cold. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, upright. Its limbs were long, too long for proportion, even blurred by motion. I could tell it was wrong. The eyes reflected infrared in a way no animal should. They burned white in the dark, fixed on the lens, fixed on us. The frame cut out as if the camera had been struck. When we retrieved it, the casing was shattered, though there were no paw prints, no boot prints, nothing but disturbed moss. Connor wanted to pack up and leave. He said the grant wasn't worth whatever was out there. Will snapped at him, voice hard. We're not running from shadows. Yet even Will slept with his rifle across his chest after that night. By day, we continued research. By night, I felt eyes in the dark. The sensation was not paranoia, it was presence. Once, while crossing the river flats, I found a caribou carcass half buried in the gravel. Its ribs were peeled back like cage bars, organs scooped clean with surgical precision. No wolf does that, no bear either. The flesh was untouched by scavengers, though it had lain long enough for frost to gather on the exposed bones. Haley gagged, but I forced myself to sketch and photograph. Data was data. Still, the image clung to me like frostbite, seeping deeper the longer I carried it. 3 nights later, Will shook me awake. "Hear that?" he hissed. Outside the cabin, the silence had broken. A low chorus echoed from the valley, not wolf howls, not human voices, but a blend of both, elongated wails that rose and fell in unison. They surrounded us, reverberating through the timber like the walls themselves vibrated. I grabbed the rifle. The sound grew closer, circling. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ceased. In the morning, we found tracks around the cabin, a perfect ring pressed deep into the frost. The prints were the same elongated shape as before, and there were dozens of them. That morning, Haley refused to leave the cabin. Connor suggested radioing for extraction. Will and I argued it down until the plane came. Our next supply drop arrived at midday. The pilot never landed. His plane circled once, then banked hard and vanished north. Supplies never fell. Later, we learned no flight had been scheduled. The station confirmed no bush plane had been dispatched to our sector. Whoever flew above us was never logged in official records. Panic grew like mold. Rations dwindled faster. Connor started talking in his sleep, muttering words none of us recognized. Haley swore she saw figures moving on the ridges at dusk. Tall shadows pacing with the rhythm of wolves but upright, their heads tipped back as if scenting us. Will cleaned his rifle compulsively, though his hands shook more each day. And me, I kept writing, logging every detail, forcing reason to hold even as reason drained away. That's what science demands, isn't it? To keep observing, even when observation breaks you. The night it came for us, the aurora lit the valley like fire. Green light shimmered across the snow, shadows warping in every direction. We heard the wails again, closer than ever, not circling, approaching. Haley screamed when she saw the first one step into the clearing. Tall wrong, its arms bent backward, joints reversing with sickening grace. Its face was both animal and human, skin stretched thin, mouth too wide. Behind it, more shapes emerged, each one shifting like silhouettes torn between forms. They moved as a pack, but not wolves, not people, something between. something that should never have crawled out of evolution's grave. Will opened fire. The sound cracked across the valley, echoing against mountains. Figures scattered into the trees, but the wails only grew louder, overlapping into a deafening chorus. I dragged Haley to the cabin, while Connor froze at the threshold, muttering his sleep words aloud. Will shouted, firing into the dark, until one of the shapes lunged from the tree line. I saw it seize him, limbs wrapping like roots around prey. His rifle clattered, his scream cut off. Then he was gone. The rest pressed closer, circling our cabin. The walls groaned under their weight. Haley sobbed. Connor whispered words I dared not understand. And me, I clutched my journal, ink smearing with sweat, knowing this account may be the only trace we leave behind. For in the Alaskan wilderness, there are things that should not exist. And they know we are here. The walls of the cabin flexed with the cold and with whatever pressed against them. Haley's breath hitched into ragged little sobs, the kind that happen when your body tries to cry without making a sound. Connor stood in front of the door, eyes rolled a little too high, whispering those syllables he'd been mumbling in his sleep. I didn't recognize the language. I didn't want to. Something dragged a palm, or what passed for a palm, over the window glass. The sound was soft, papery, like a muth's wing amplified. Beneath it, I heard the timbers creak as weight leaned in. I thought of how far we were from anyone who could help, and how much farther from anyone who would believe us. The aurora outside pulsed slow and steady, a green lung inflating, a green lung deflating. It lit the tree line bright as a memory and dark as a lie. Back from the door, I whispered to Connor. He didn't move. His lips pressed around more of those sounds, and I realized he wasn't talking to us at all. He was answering something. Connor. I put my hand on his shoulder. His skin burned through the jacket. He flinched as if my touch were a sting and blinked himself back into the room. You hear it? He asked. It's not outside. It's under everything. I hear what's outside, I said, and shoved the bureau we'd dragged in front of the door another inch, then another. The knobs squealed. The chorus swelled, a blend of wolf, throated howl and voice, box vowels, as if a choir of tall, hungry things had learned to sing from the echo of a human church. It rose and rose until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate, and then, all at once, it cut off. The silence didn't feel like relief. It felt like a decision. We waited for the break, and that didn't come. I thought about Will and the way those limbs wrapped him, not like an animal pounce, but like roots tightening around a stone. I kept expecting to hear his voice, a muffled plea outside. I kept expecting to hear my own. Dawn came squinting over the ridges. The aurora peeled itself off the sky and folded away somewhere the sun couldn't follow. We cracked the door an inch, then two, then wide enough to slide our bodies through sideways. My breath smoked, then stopped smoking, then smoked again as if the air couldn't decide whether it wanted to be winter or a dream of winter. Around the cabin lay that ring of prints, a perfect band of elongated pads with splayed, almost human toves spread and thin crescent knives where claws bit in. No leading in, no leading out, just presence. The ring had thickened during the night, layered like growth rings in a tree. Where they stood, Haley whispered. Her face had the paper, white look of a person who hasn't slept in a long time and is lying to herself about it. Where they waited, we found Will's rifle half, buried in evergreen needles 30 yards off. The barrel was bent in a clean, smooth arc, like a straw someone had worried while thinking. Clamped around the stock was a braid. I wanted it to be willow. It was not willow. It had the dun, yellow sheen of connective tissue twisted on itself and tied with a knot no human hand would invent. We didn't talk for a while after that. The radio on the table gave a little crackle. and then a thread of voice pushed through a cheerful, practiced cadence giving a weather bulletin for the Alaska Territory, calling it that with the brightness of 1958, a high pressure moving in from the bearing, lows to -20. Travel advisory for sled freighting along a corridor that hasn't existed in my lifetime. The voice stuttered, reversed like a tape, and then bled into our era long enough to tell us there would be no flights into our sector due to maintenance at the Park Road runway. We were, the voice said, encouraged to remain calm. It didn't say why the encouragement felt like a dare. We took inventory. What we had: 3 days of rations if we stretched them hard, stove fuel for maybe 5, 1 rifle that wasn't bent, 2 flare guns with 4 flares total, a field kit heavy on plaster for tracks and light on courage, my notebooks, Haley's camera, Connor's sat phone that couldn't find a satellite anymore because the sky had apparently learned to lie to machines. What we didn't have, Will. What we couldn't count on: the cabin holding another night if the decision in the dark turned into action. We make for the river, I said, saying it felt like lighting a match, just to prove the dark could be pushed back. Follow the flats south until we hit the old maintenance road along the Toklat. There used to be a ranger cache near a gravel bar. Even if the cache is gone, we can follow the river east. The Park Road bends there. Someone will be there. Or there will be the idea of someone, and sometimes that's the same thing. The valley doesn't want us to leave, Haley said. Then we make the valley want something else. We packed in silence. We left behind anything that couldn't keep us alive. I put the braid in a sample bag, because that is what a scientist does. When faced with a thing that frightens him, he pretends he can measure it, and sometimes the pretense is enough to move you forward. Before we went, I walked a slow circle around the ring of prints. I didn't step on it. I didn't want to know what would happen if I broke it, or if it would reform around my boot and keep me like the night had kept Will. We moved in a tight file down through the blue shadow of spruce and alder. The snow here was powder on top and old glass beneath. Each step punched through to a crunch that sounded too loud. The world still didn't have birds. The world still didn't have the small scurrying sounds that make a big landscape feel less like a set and more like a place. Now and then I heard an extra footfall where none should be. A faint fourth beat tucked inside the 3 of ours, as if something had matched our cadence and learned the trick of footsteps, but not quite the rhythm. Each time I turned, there was nothing but long trees and the long, straight look of daylight that only comes when the sun low burns for hours. Close to midday, we reached a ridge that sloped to the river flats. The Toklat ran braided, 1,000 thin ribbons of cold throwing light at the sky, each trying to find a way to be the river, and none succeeding for long. I'd worked river basins across the interior. You learn to read them the way you read faces. This one looked wrong. The main channel, the one that should have leaned east, leaned a little west. On the flats, someone had built cairns. They lifted from the snow like vertebrae. Each was topped with something pale. As we neared, I could see they weren't stones at all, not all of them. The pale things were caribou phalanges, cleaned and polished as if licked by a patient fire. Haley stopped. "Don't touch them." "I wasn't planning to," I said. "They're arranging us," she said. "Like chess. We're the pieces. The board is the whole valley." I wanted to tell her that was irrational. Instead, I told her to drink water. We picked our way onto the flats. The snow was shallower here, wind scoured. Wind doesn't always answer to the same geography you do. It found us when everything else avoided us. It tugged at the hoods of our parkas and brought with it the smell of cold metal and something open, like the air inside a deep freezer when you've left it closed too long. We chose a braid to cross and found a log the river had thrown down as a mercy. Halfway across, I felt weight come onto it behind me, weight that did not belong to any visible body. The log dipped, my knees bent. Haley grabbed my pack. The air to my left changed. As if something exhaled with the sound turned off, I fired a flare into the water without thinking. It hit the surface, hissed, and guttered in a flare of chemical white. For an instant, the braid glowed. Something moved through it like heat through glass. Clear, tall, the shape of a posture more than a body. Then the flame died and it was only water again, running toward a bend that bent the wrong way. We made the far bank with our hearts beating in our mouths. Under the lee of a low embankment, we took stock again. Connor had stopped shivering. That frightened me more than the shivering. He drew in his notebook, sketching a line of ridges and small arches like vertebrae or like the cairns we'd left behind. "We want to aim for this saddle," he said. He pointed to a gap along a ridge that none of us had been through, and that wasn't on my topo in the way he drew it. "If we cut there, we'll shave hours." "You've been through there?" I asked. He shook his head. "I've dreamed through there." The wind played a little scale in the snow grass. A mile downstream, a line of dark things moved along the willows. I raised the binoculars. At first I thought they were wolves, tall, rangy, but the gaits didn't match. The legs had too many bends in them. One of the things turned its head, and the motion was almost human in that it looked like a choice. It saw us. It paused. Then it kept moving. Not toward us, not away exactly. Just along, as if it had all day and all night, and time was a kind of weather. We took Connor's shortcut. It was either that or stand where we were until the light failed, and there are places where staying still is the worst kind of motion. The saddle rose through stunted spruce and willow cut low by snow creep. Above treeline, the land turned to a geology lecture. Broken schist and quartz veins like knuckles in the earth's fist. The wind consolidated into a howl of its own that sounded almost like the night. I kept my eyes on Connor's back and on Haley's boots. I counted steps. I counted breaths when steps didn't feel like enough. When I ran out of numbers, I made new ones. Numbers don't care who invents them. Halfway up, the extra footsteps returned. There, not there, there again, all while the ground under me told the simple truth of 3 sets of prints. My mind did the arithmetic. It did not like the answer. We reached the saddle in the flat gray of mid-afternoon that Alaska calls day. On the far side lay a ravine, a clean bite taken from the world by some old, slow catastrophe. The walls were striped with black and iron red, banded like the side of a sleeping creature. The bottom was drifted smooth, the kind of snow that looks like a duvet from a distance and a trap up close. At the mouth of the ravine, something had drawn a circle in ash. It lay just under the skin of windblown snow, a faint thread until you saw it, and then you could not stop seeing it. In one segment, prints like ours entered. In another segment, prints like ours left. The pieces between told a story with gaps. I didn't want to fill the gaps with imagination. I wanted very much to be unimaginative. That would have felt safer. "We can go around," Haley said. "Going around costs us daylight," I said. "Daylight doesn't seem to matter here." She won that argument because she was right. We followed the rim, keeping the ash circle to our right. I watched it out of the corner of my eye. I half expected it to rearrange itself like iron filings dancing toward a magnet. It did not. The wind took little sips of it and carried it off into the ravine like ash from a long, cold fire. 100 yards farther, the first bell rang. We hadn't set bells. That didn't stop the sound from existing. It came from the ravine floor, then from behind us. Then, brightest of all, from somewhere inside the hollow of my own ear. Ding, 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 ding. as if a string had been tied between my eardrum and some small metal thing and plucked. The pattern repeated 1, 2, 1. The air learned the pattern. The wind repeated it. The snow learned it. A moment later, so did the trees. Not a trick of branches. An answer. An answer to a bell that had never been rung and had rung the valley awake anyway. Connor began whispering again, low and steady, like a man reading a liturgy to himself. I didn't recognize the words. I recognized the cadence. He was matching the bells. "Stop," I said. "Connor, stop." He did, and his eyes looked too wet in his face. "I didn't start it," he said. "It started me." I took his pack strap and guided him forward. He let me. It felt like handling a sleepwalker who was dreaming his feet into existence with each step. Haley slipped on a rime stone and went to one knee. She hissed through her teeth. I'm fine. She wasn't. A half hour later, she wasn't pretending to be. Her ankle puffed inside her boot until the laces bit angry lines up her shin. I wrapped it with an elastic from the med kit, and we moved on, slower and lower and much less clever. The ravine pinched down into a kind of throat. I didn't want to go in there. The wind didn't want to either. It dodged the mouth and hissed along the rim instead. We didn't have choices left that felt like choices. The throat was where the ground allowed us to move without wading waist deep. The light greased itself along the snow and didn't stick anywhere. Halfway through that throat was an overhang, snow piled into a lip, with enough space under it to make a cramped shelter, if you didn't mind sharing the darkness with whatever preferred darkness. We minded. We chose it anyway. I carved a slot in the snowbank with my collapsible shovel, and we wriggled inside. The air tasted like the inside of an old freezer, and like an idea going stale. The tunnel curved left and opened into a pocket big enough to sit in side by side, knees up, backs bent against the packed snow. I struck the stove and set a pot to melt snow, and listened to how small that sound was in the new silence. Haley found the lantern. It lay in a shallow of the pocket, half encased in ice, brass gone black with time. Next to it were pages sealed inside a tin. The tin had the dull look of something that has survived by being forgotten. The pages weren't whole. The ink had bled wherever water could touch it. The parts we could read belonged to 1931, or to a hand that enjoyed pretending. The owner was a field man for a mining outfit and had been stranded after the spring breakup. He wrote about long quiet that hums, about dogs that will not look toward the hills, about man-sized shape traveling with the wolves but not with them. One, the nib passed so hard the nib had scored the paper, and the words came out even though the ink had given up. Do not say their names. What names? Haley asked, as if maybe the page would tell us if we were polite. The stove coughed once, blue flame guttering, then steadied. I spun the lantern's wheel and was surprised to hear felt resistance and then a catch. Something inside still had a taste of fuel, after almost a century or after a night. The mantle bloomed into light. The thin, insistent blue you see in a hospital lab, a flame that believes in itself with a fanatic's clarity. It pushed back the dark in a tight globe. The snow lit up around us with a depth that looked almost faceted, as if we sat inside a gem. That was when the first voice spoke right outside the tunnel. Nate. The word arrived with the ease of a friend. It arrived with Will's voice, sweetened by hope the way voices get when they believe you've been found and saved, and that both those things mean the same as the other. I snapped the lantern down to kill the glow, and my hand didn't move. It stayed on the valve, knuckles white, while some other part of me whispered that we should hide the light. My bones voted to keep it. Don't, Haley said into her teeth. Don't answer. Will, the voice said to itself, to us. It's me. I'm hurt. Help. The air in the tunnel tightened the way air does before lightning. That bell pattern rang once, twice, not in any place we could name, and then the voice learned the pattern and threaded it into the spaces between words. Hell, ding, ding ding, peak. Words and notes riding each other until meaning bent. Do not say their names, I said, barely a breath. Connor, those words you've been muttering, did you hear them from a voice that sounded like me? Or Haley? Or yourself? He put his hands over his ears. He shook his head as if to knock something loose. I hear them in the marrow, like the bones are a radio and the station is underneath hearing. Like the dream keeps going after I wake up, and the waking is the part that's pretend. The lantern cast our shadows against the snow, the three of us drawn tall and thin. A fourth shadow leaned across the tunnel mouth and didn't belong to anything I could point at. The tunnel ceiling groaned, a long glide of snow settling an inch. The lantern's flame fluttered and then pushed itself taller without consuming more fuel. It wasn't a trick of air. It was an act of will. The pocket grew warmer by exactly the amount a prayer warms a person, not enough to be proof, enough to keep your mouth working. The voice changed. Not will anymore. Not anymore. It tried on my rhythms. It tried on Haley's lull of Appalachian vowels. It tried on the sound of Connor whispering to himself when he thought none of us were listening. Each time it wore us a little better, like a suit wrinkling into shape around a new body. I'm going to block the tunnel, I said. When I do, it's going to push back. Don't you dare go out there, Haley said. I'm not going out. I pulled the shovel close, then dropped it. A better barricade lay within reach of the packs. I dragged them into the mouth of the tunnel, stacking them in a tight wedge between us and the voice. The lantern light cut around the edges of the gear in thin, bright knives. I didn't want to know if those knives touched anything I couldn't see. The voice made one last attempt at being Will, the way a bad actor makes one last attempt at a line reading. Pain a little too polished. Affection a little too careful. Then it changed tactics. It said my name again and paired it with a syllable I'd never given anyone, the name my mother used when I broke a bone as a kid. Not Nathan. The one only she used, and only twice. It felt like a thumb pressed to a bruise. The tunnel learned the name and pressed it back at me from the packed snow. That was the first moment I truly believed we might not make it to another sunrise. We did. Weeks or minutes later, time had spent itself anyhow. The voice left the tunnel entrance the way a tide leaves. The bell pattern stumbled and then stopped. The wind remembered how to be wind and went on its way. When I finally allowed myself to breathe like a person, my lungs creaked. We slept in turns. Each time my eyes shut, I dreamt a map where the rivers ran in both directions at once and the roads refused to lead away. In one of the dreams, I watched Will walk across a snowfield, holding his arms out like a sleepwalker. He walked and never sank. His shadow had elbows in places elbows don't go. I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth and the sound of my own name buried in my teeth like a seed. By late light, we crawled out of the pocket. The ravine had changed. The ash circle at its mouth had slid 10 feet to the left, smudged, and then perfectly redrawn like a compass that insists on pointing where it wants. The prints we'd made along the rim had been copied below, line for line, as if the ravine had practiced being us half the night and was proud of the result. We moved fast, because sometimes the only way to not be a pattern is to act before the pattern learns you again. We made the lip and started down the far side. The slope slick with a glaze that looked like water and wasn't. Haley's ankle held just long enough to make me hopeful. Then it buckled. She cried out once and bit it off. I hauled her up by her pack straps, and we hobbled together like a six, legged animal that hadn't learned how to share a nervous system yet. "Stop," Connor said. His voice had gone flat. He stared across the slope at a stand of stunted spruce. Something stood among them.
Tall, too still.
Its head tilted a fraction, and in that fraction was a whole grammar of hunger. It had Will's jacket on. It wore it with the loose wrongness of someone who knows clothes only as a rumor. The sleeves hung past where its hands ended, and from the sleeves jutted long pale lengths that were not bone, and were not branches, and were not anything the textbooks I'd loved could give me. "Don't look at its face," I said before I knew why I said it. Haley clapped a hand over her eyes and then made a small, animal sound anyway. Connor made no sound at all. His lips shaped one of his dream syllables, and the thing among the spruce cocked its head as if startled, as if delighted to hear a guest speak the house's language. It stepped forward. I raised the rifle, my hand steady because no part of me had room to shake. I sighted center mass. My finger tightened. It didn't fire. Not because I lost my nerve, because the metal of the trigger wasn't there. It had the slick feel of a thing that thinks it is a trigger, but has remembered at the last second that it is river water sliding over a stone. I tried again. The rifle remained a rifle by effort alone. The thing took another step and learned how to be Will, not by wearing his voice now, but by wearing the way his shoulders had always sat a little forward, as if braced for recoil or for an apology. "Connor," I said, "do not say the name that's in your mouth." "It's in my bones," he said. He wasn't arguing. He was reporting. The lantern in my pack, old brass, blue flame. A mistake and a miracle. We'd left it on a low simmer to keep its mantle warm. I yanked it loose, turned the wheel hard. The flame punched bright. Not the cheery orange of a campfire, but laboratory blue. The color of something that wants to be exact more than it wants to be loved. The light skated over the snow and touched the thing in the trees. It flinched. Not much, enough. It tucked its head like an animal caught in a beam, and then smoothed itself into tall shadow, and then into nothing at all the way. A figure in your peripheral vision can decide a tree if you turn your face. Where it had stood, the snow showed prints that were not prints so much as small holes where the surface had chosen not to exist for a second. We ran. Not far, not fast. Fast enough to believe in the idea of a way for a few minutes. The slope broke under us into scrub. The scrub gave way to a low sweep of ground, sparkling with surface hoar, that turned every step into a risk. By the time we reached the shelter of a boulder field, the light had thinned to the color of old coins. 2 more miles to the river, maybe 4. The map in my head had stopped being a map and started being a hope. We stopped behind a boulder the size of a shed and tried to shrink ourselves into the shape of people the valley might ignore. Between one breath and the next, Connor wasn't beside us. He hadn't gotten up. He hadn't wandered. He had simply been here, and then a space existed where he was not. Then his voice came from beyond the boulder, speaking those syllables in a clear, calm tone, almost curious. A response rose from the rocks across from him, gentle and eager, like 2 old friends trying each other's names after a long time apart. I rounded the boulder. Connor stood at the edge of a slit in the ground, a narrow, perfect seam where frost had pried the world open. He leaned over it, whispering into the seam. The seam whispered back. As I lunged for him, something reached from the seam. I don't have better language. An arm, if an arm can be a temperature. A hand, if a hand can be the absence of light shaped into wanting. It touched his coat at the shoulder, and the fabric dimpled as if pressed by a finger that only existed from one angle. For a heartbeat, I saw the space beyond the seam. Not depth exactly, but a layering of the same ground slightly wrong over itself, like a stack of thin plates misaligned. somewhere inside the layers. Something that remembered wolves and remembered us, and remembered the weather that had been here before any of those things, smiled with a mouth it didn't need. I grabbed Connor's hood and yanked. The seam's hand, or the idea of it, slid off him like cold smoke off a river. He fell backward into me and we went down together, his elbow catching my ribs hard enough to make white static bloom behind my eyes. Haley scrambled around the boulder, lantern held low. The blue light fell into the seam, and the seam reacted like a drop note in a quiet room. It tightened, or the world tightened around it, and then the slit was only a line of shadow where snow had drifted into a crack and decided to be a crack for now. Connor sobbed once. "I didn't say it," he said, desperate for credit. "I didn't say it." "You almost did," I said. "That counts. We didn't try for the river again that night. We made a camp of it there. In the broken teeth of rock, the lantern tucked between us like a small animal we were tasked with keeping alive. The things on the ridgeline paced. They didn't approach. The blue light had opinion enough for all of us and made a circle the night pretended to respect. The wind sang the bell pattern once more. The mountains answered it, then grew bored. From some mile I couldn't name came a long sound like a whale's blow, but stretched thin, as if crossing land costed something. The sky tore itself open in faint aurora streamers and stitched itself shut again. Haley slept face down on her arms, the angle of her neck wrong in a way you only allow when you've run to the edge of yourself and found a little more. I watched the lantern flame and the way it refused to flicker in drafts it should have respected. I thought of the man from 1931 and the dogs who wouldn't look toward the hills and the line he'd pressed into paper with nothing but pressure, "Do not say their names." The names wanted saying. That was how they worked. Like a hook laid out in words. Like a road that loops if you call it by the name on its first map. I held the words in my mouth and refused to know them. Somewhere close, the snow sighed and held a shape for a second. The print of a foot with too many joints. The suggestion of a knee that could bend any way it liked. And then the shape melted out of itself. I kept my finger through the lantern's carry ring until dawn, because that was one true thing left to do, and because I wanted the blue flame to know it wasn't alone in believing in itself. My name still belonged to me when dawn broke, and that counted as a victory. The three of us, if Connor still counted as three, sat stiff in the lee of the boulder field, the lantern's blue eye guttering low but steady. The creatures on the ridge never descended. They paced in silhouettes against the bruised sky, long limbed shadows that refused to belong to the trees. Their movements were deliberate, almost theatrical, as if they wanted us to see that they hadn't gone anywhere. As if they wanted us to know we were being allowed this morning. No more. Haley's ankle had swollen to the size of her boot top. She wouldn't say it, but she couldn't go far. Connor's eyes were raw and rimmed in red, his skin gray with fatigue. He had stopped whispering in his sleep, and I didn't know whether that meant the language was finished with him, or he was finished with it. Either way, I didn't trust the silence that pooled around him. I stoked the stove, boiled what little snow we dared scrape from the ground, and tried to talk like a leader. "We'll follow the boulder field east. It'll drop us back toward the Talklet. Once we hit the gravel bars, there's a chance we'll find a ranger cache. Fuel, rations, maybe even a radio." Haley gave a dry laugh. "A cache. You're saying salvation lives in a box someone buried here 50 years ago and forgot." "That's exactly what I'm saying." The wilderness didn't disagree. It didn't agree either. It simply watched, wide and patient. We broke camp with numb fingers. Connor lagged behind, muttering that the seam in the ground hadn't been a crack at all, but a mouth. It spoke in reverse, he said. That's why I almost understood. Because it was saying it backwards. I told him to shut up. He smiled as though I'd given him permission to continue. The boulder field gave way to a low swale where dwarf birch lay pressed to the ground by years of snow creep. The branches rattled in the wind like dry bones. We moved fast, though speed was relative. 3 limping shadows against a land too large to notice. By midday, the sky darkened. Not with clouds, but with the thin haze that comes before a storm you can't see yet. And then we found the antlers. They rose from the snow in a neat row, 12 racks of caribou antlers, planted like fence posts. Each skull was buried, each rack pointing inward to form a long corridor. The symmetry was surgical. The tines had been polished until they gleamed like ivory. Across their surfaces, lines were carved, spirals, hatch marks, patterns that twisted if you looked too long. I counted steps into the corridor. The wind hushed. My boots sank into snow that didn't crunch, didn't yield. It felt like walking across skin. Haley stopped dead. We don't go in there. We have to cross, I said. Unless you want to climb the ridge. She shook her head violently, clutching her parka tight around her throat. No, this isn't for us. This is theirs. Connor stepped forward without hesitation. His face slack, his gait steady, he walked between the antlers like a man entering a church. They've been waiting, he murmured. The wolves left the path for us. We're meant to follow. I grabbed him by the hood, yanking him back. His body went limp in my hands, as if he'd been waiting to be pulled. His pupils swallowed his irises. Do you feel it? He whispered. The way it bends. The air's not air in there. It's...
Shut up.
I forced him to the snow. You say one more word like that, I leave you here. Do you understand me? He nodded too quickly, too eagerly. We skirted the corridor, climbing the ridge after all. My lungs burned. Haley stumbled on her swollen ankle, but I preferred the pain of stone and slope to whatever waited inside that geometry of bone. From the top we looked back down. The corridor was gone. Where it had stood was only blank snow, flat and unbroken. None of us spoke for a long time. That night we made camp beneath a shallow overhang of granite. I built a fire of scrub birch, though I hated the idea of smoke announcing us. The flames seemed to die into the air before they rose, as if the wilderness disapproved of combustion. The heat barely reached our hands. Haley pressed her ankle close to the coals until the skin reddened. She didn't complain. Connor wandered from the fire, pacing the snow's edge, staring into the tree line. They're closer, he said. How do you know? Haley asked. Because they're in me. He looked at me when he said it, eyes glistening like wet stone. I pretended not to understand, but I did. I'd felt their presence since that first night, the ring of prints, the wrong carcass, the voices in the dark. I'd felt them edging nearer, testing us. And I wondered if Connor was right, if the real encirclement wasn't outside at all. The fire guttered low. The lantern blue in my pack pulsed faintly, responding not to my hand but to something else. And then from the ridge above came the sound of running. Not feet, not hooves. The hybrid cadence of both, pounding snow, drawing near. I grabbed the rifle, though by now I knew it could betray me. Haley reached for the flare gun. Connor only spread his arms, smiling wide as if welcoming old friends. Shapes burst from the tree line. Not wolves, not people, both. Their legs were jointed wrong, bent too many times. Their faces were stretched masks of fur and flesh. Some ran on 4 limbs, some on 2, some shifting mid-stride as if reality hadn't finished sculpting them. Their eyes burned pale white. Their mouths hung open, drooling steam. The fire sputtered and died. The lantern flared in my pack, bursting into furious blue. The creatures skidded to a halt at the edge of the light. They hissed. Not animal, not human, but a sound of frustration, like predators denied the final step of the hunt. They circled, pacing, testing the border of the glow. One stepped forward. Its face wore Will's. Not his body, just his face, stretched across the skull like parchment. His lips cracked into a grin. "Nathaniel," it said perfectly in his voice. Haley sobbed. Connor laughed. I raised the rifle, but the barrel warped again, softening, melting like wax. The bullet chamber was nothing but powder between my fingers. The thing laughed. My friend's laugh poured through a stranger's mouth. The lantern flared brighter. The blue bled outward, scorching snow into black glass. The creature shrieked, stumbling back. One collapsed, writhing, its form snapping between wolf, man, shadow, bone, and something with no name at all. Its skin peeled away in strips of smoke, vanishing before they hit the ground. The others retreated, screeching into the timberline until only silence remained. Connor stared at the blackened snow where the creature had died. "They don't want the light," he said, "but they'll learn. They always learn." That night none of us slept. I kept the lantern lit, blue flame trembling, fuel dwindling. Haley whispered prayers into her parka. Connor whispered something else. By dawn, the prints around our camp had formed another ring. Smaller this time, tighter, and inside the ring, directly in front of us, stood a cairn of stone topped with a single human tooth. I didn't recognize it, but Haley did. She touched her tongue to the side of her mouth, and her face went pale. One of her molars was missing. The tooth on the cairn gleamed pale against the dawn. Haley's hand stayed pressed to her jaw, fingers trembling, as if she still didn't quite believe what she felt. I didn't want to believe it either. She hadn't screamed, hadn't woken bloody in the night. One of her teeth had simply ceased to belong to her and begun belonging to them. Connor bent close, his breath fogging the stone. "They're marking us," he said. "They've always marked us. The rings, the cairns, the ash circles, they're tallying pieces. They're making sure what goes in comes out different." I snapped him back by his collar. "Stop." But Haley's eyes met mine, and there was no defiance in them, no anger, only a plea. "Am I next?" I didn't answer. Scientists are supposed to trade in certainty, but there was nothing in me but ash. We packed fast. Every shadow on the ridge felt thick, swollen with watchers. The lantern burned low, fuel thinning, though its flame stayed stubbornly blue. I cradled it in one hand as if it were an infant, terrified of what would happen when it went out. We angled downslope toward the Talklat. The land rolled in waves of scrub and snow, dotted with half-buried stones like vertebrae breaking through flesh. My boots sank deep, pulling me slow, but the thought of stillness felt worse. Movement was the only defiance we had left. By midday we reached the gravel bars, wide tongues of frozen silt spreading across the valley. The Talklat itself had vanished into ice, broad plates of it ridged like scales, creaking beneath the sun. Beyond, on the far bank, stood something I had been praying for, a weathered cash box half hidden by drift. "See," I said, forcing a thin smile. "They do leave gifts." Haley hobbled faster despite her ankle. Connor followed without a word. The box was steel, rusted at the hinges, but still intact. My gloved hands tore it open with frantic hope. Inside it, tins of powdered milk, old packets of jerky hardened to stone, a stack of canvas tarps, a coil of rope, and, most blessed of all, a canister of stove fuel. Haley wept when she saw it. Connor only touched the rope with reverence. "They knew we'd need this," he said. "They?" I asked. "The ones who walked here before. The ones who watched. The ones who left the path behind." His voice shook with awe, not fear. "We're not the first. We're just the latest." The sun dragged itself sideways along the horizon, never rising, never falling. We decided to camp by the cache, though I hated the exposure of the open flats. But Haley couldn't walk farther, and Connor was too far gone into whatever trance held him. That night the bells returned. Not faint this time, not distant. Loud and insistent, a tolling from beneath the river ice. Ding, ding ding, ding. The sound shivered through the plates, rattling like chains. I knelt, pressing my palm to the surface, and the vibration hummed into my bones. Haley covered her ears. Make it stop. Connor dropped to his knees, pressing his mouth to the ice. It's a summons, he whispered. They're calling us home. I tore him back, but when I looked down, the ice beneath where he'd kissed it had darkened. Circles spreading outward, the faint suggestion of shapes pacing beneath. Tall shapes jointed wrong, their faces flickering in pale light. They walked as if the river were glass, their eyes upturned to us. The lantern blazed blue against the night. The shapes halted, then scattered into darkness. The bells cut off, the ice stilled, but I knew they weren't gone, only patient. We slept in shifts, though sleep was too generous a word. I lay against the cash box, rifle across my chest, lantern at my side. In the dream that found me, Will stood at the edge of the antler corridor, smiling. You'll follow, he said, because all things return. The valley doesn't let you out. It only lets you deeper. I woke with blood in my mouth and realized I'd bitten my tongue nearly in half. By morning, Haley was worse. Fever burned under her skin. The missing tooth had left no wound, no socket, just a smooth stretch of gum that looked healed years ago. She whispered names in her sleep, names I didn't recognize, syllables that tugged at the air like hooks. Connor grew restless, pacing the gravel bars. They want her, he said flatly. She's marked. That's the bargain. If we give her... I slammed him against the cash box before he could finish. Say it, and I'll kill you. His grin widened. You don't understand. They don't want us dead. They want us changed. The day passed under a sky that wouldn't shift. Light throbbed weak, as if the sun itself were failing. The valley stretched too far in every direction, a loop that never ended. No matter how long we walked, the ridges remained the same. I checked my compass. The needle spun lazy circles, uninterested in north. When dusk bled into more dusk, the voices began. At first, just one, Will's again, soft pleading. Then others, dozens, blending into a chorus. They called our names. Mine, Haley's, Connor's. They said them with tenderness, with hunger, with inevitability. Haley whimpered, clutching her ears. Connor smiled, mouthing the names with them. And I gripped the lantern until my knuckles cracked. The ring of prints formed around us once more. Pressed into the gravel this time, clear even on frozen silt. Inside the ring lay another cairn. Upon it, not a tooth, not bone, but a photograph. My photograph. One I'd taken years ago in Montana, of a wolf collared at dusk, eyes glowing in the flash. The image was crumpled, smeared with frost, but unmistakable. My hand shook as I picked it up. The back bore writing I had never made, do not say their names. The bells tolled again, louder than ever. The river ice cracked with each note. Connor dropped to his knees, screaming words he shouldn't have known, the air around him vibrating with each syllable. Haley sobbed, and I realized, with a clarity colder than any Alaskan night, that the valley wasn't just holding us. It was remaking us. The prints in the ring deepened. From them, shapes began to rise, slow, deliberate, pulling themselves out of absence into form. Tall, jointed wrong, their mouths stretched wide, already forming syllables. My name was on their lips. The lantern blazed so violently I thought the glass would shatter. Blue fire roared outward, a dome of impossible light. The creatures reeled back, shrieking. One collapsed, its body unraveling into ash and snow. Another staggered, shrank, and reformed into something smaller, pitiful, an echo of Will, crawling on all fours, whimpering like a wounded dog. Connor screamed with them, not in fear but in joy. Do you see? They're not killing us.
They're teaching us.
I dragged Haley to her feet, half carrying her weight. Move. The lantern light throbbed, straining, eating fuel too fast. The creatures pressed at its edge, claws scraping invisible walls. The bells grew deafening, shaking the river ice until fissures spider-webbed across its surface. We ran. Across the bars into the timberline, stumbling through drifts that sucked at our legs. The bells followed, tolling not just in air but in bone. My teeth ached with each note. Haley moaned, her fever worsening, her words slurring into half prayers, half names. Behind us, Connor did not follow. I turned once. He stood in the ring, arms raised, face uplifted to the night. The creatures bent over him like priests at a baptism, their mouths stretching wide. And he welcomed them. He let them pour their language into him until his body shook like a conduit. His voice joined theirs, perfect and strong, and the wilderness answered. I wanted to go back. God help me, I almost did. But Haley's weight against me kept me moving, one step, then another, into a forest that did not belong to any map. The lantern burned low, blue flame guttering, but still it lived. Each time it flickered, shadows leaned closer. Each time it steadied, they fell back. And so we pushed on, deeper into a land that had stopped pretending to be Alaska, into a wilderness that remade itself with every step, where the trees leaned wrong and the snow whispered names. Somewhere behind us, Connor's voice rose higher, jubilant, carried on the bells. Somewhere ahead, the valley waited, endless, patient, and hungry. The wilderness of Alaska is endless when it chooses to be. That's what I understood, carrying Haley through the snow, lantern clutched to my chest like a beating heart. Every tree leaned toward us. Every drift shifted as though stirred by something beneath. The night never deepened, never lifted. Time was no longer ours, but a tightening of the throat, a slowing of steps, the steady dimming of a flame that was never meant to last. Haley's fever worsened. Her face was blotched red, her eyes rolling back, her lips cracked from whispering names. Names I couldn't hear clearly. Names that bent the air around her as she spoke them. I shook her every time her voice rose too loud, begged her to stop, but she clutched my sleeve with fingers like claws and whispered, "They're already inside me. What's left to keep out?" The forest thinned into another valley. The snow there was smooth as poured plaster, unbroken, yet my boots sank deep as if it wanted to drink me down. I dragged Haley forward, each step an act of will, and then, ahead, I saw light. Not aurora, not lantern glow, a cabin. It stood alone on the flats, smoke rising from its chimney. Yellow light burning steady in the windows. A ranger outpost. It had to be. It had the look of those old supply cabins, weathered boards, a pitched roof half swallowed in snowfall. Salvation. Haley, I whispered. We made it. Her head lolled against my shoulder. I stumbled faster, each breath tearing my throat raw. The lantern sputtered, its blue flame weakening, but the cabin's glow beckoned like a promise. I threw open the door warmth. Fire crackling, the smell of stew. On the table, a kettle steaming, coats hung on hooks by the wall. And, most impossibly, Will, sitting by the fire, smiling. He rose, spreading his arms. "Nathaniel, you found your way." Haley stirred weakly, lifted her head, and when she saw him, she sobbed. "Will." I set her down on the bunk. My rifle slipped from my shoulder, forgotten. I wanted to collapse, to believe. But the lantern's blue flame shrieked in its glass. It guttered and flared as though raging against the sight. Will stepped closer. His eyes burned white in the firelight. His smile split too wide. "Lay it down," he said, nodding at the lantern. "You don't need it anymore." The fire popped. Sparks rose, but none of them faded. They hung in the air, suspended, twisting into shapes like runes, like letters of a language not mine. The walls of the cabin seemed to lean, to breathe. Haley whispered a name, The fire roared brighter. Will's smile stretched until his cheeks tore in blood shadow. I backed toward the door, lantern raised. The light fought the room, casting it into blue angles, stripping away its disguise. For a moment I saw the truth. There was no cabin, no fire, no Will. We stood in a hollow of snow, black cairns rising around us, each crowned with teeth. The fire was a circle of burning bones, the smoke made of voices. The bunks were slabs of ice, each etched with human faces pressed beneath the surface. And Will, what I had called Will, was taller than the trees, his limbs bending in ways that made the world recoil, his head tilted, eyes blazing. His mouth opened wider and wider until the whole valley sang with the sound. I staggered back, lantern blazing. Haley screamed. The thing that wore Will stepped into the circle of blue light. Its flesh rippled, skin shuddering like cloth in a storm. It screamed, not in rage but in hunger, in denial of what the light refused to allow. Its mouth snapped shut, its body contorted, limbs twisting until they broke and reformed. The sound was bone grinding on bone. Haley crawled toward it, tears streaking her cheeks. "Take me," she begged. "If that's the bargain, take me." I grabbed her, hauled her back.
No.
She thrashed in my grip, her voice raw.
You can't stop it.
They marked me. They're inside me. You think you can carry me out, Nathaniel? You think there's an out left? This is all there is. This is the world now. The thing lunged. The lantern flared so bright it felt like staring into a star. For an instant, everything froze. The cairns, the faces in the ice, the runes in the air. The entire valley held its breath, and then the glass shattered. Blue fire poured out, a flood of light that burned snow to vapor, stone to ash. The creatures shrieked, dozens of them, hundreds, their forms tearing apart like paper in flame. The cairns toppled. The bells cracked into silence. The valley convulsed. When the light died, the lantern was gone. Silence. I stood on bare rock. No snow, no forest. Just gray stone stretching in every direction, flat and endless, beneath a sky the color of old steel. Haley lay beside me, motionless. Her face was pale, her chest rising faintly. I touched her cheek. Cold but alive. Connor's voice carried across the emptiness. I turned. He stood far off, arms raised, surrounded by shadows that clung to him like smoke. He was smiling, rapturous. "Do you see?" he shouted. "We're inside the name now."
We've become it.
His voice echoed, splitting into layers. The shadows moved with him, forming and unforming. Then, with a final cry, he dissolved into them, gone. I carried Haley. There was no direction to follow, no compass to trust. The land stretched infinite. Once, I thought I saw mountains on the horizon, but they slid away as I walked. Once, I thought I saw the Toklat again, flowing both ways at once, but when I blinked it was gone. Time passed. Minutes. Years. I don't know. The sky never changed. My legs moved because stopping was worse. At last I saw a shape ahead. A ranger cabin, the same as before. Smoke curling from its chimney, light glowing in the windows. I stopped. My knees buckled. I laughed, broken, hollow. Haley stirred in my arms, her eyes opened. They burned pale white. "It's time," she whispered. I dropped her, staggered back. Her body rose from the ground, lifted by nothing, her limbs bending too far. Her mouth opened wide, and from it poured the sound of bells. Ding, ding, ding. The sky answered. The land shifted, stone rippling like water. The air filled with voices, mine among them, calling my name. I clutched my head, screaming, but the sound was drowned. The last thing I saw before the world folded was Haley's face. No longer hers, but stretched, twisted, smiling with hunger. And then the wilderness closed its mouth around me.